Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tailosive EV live on YouTube. Love saying that. It's been a while. I'm sorry, it's been busy. There's been lots of videos I've wanted to make, but I just finished watching Aptera's latest live webinar, and I thought it was very uplifting, very exciting. But full disclosure, I am a pretty diehard Aptera fanboy, so I'm willing to look past a lot of the challenges and struggles they've been facing. They might not answer all your questions, or address them at least, because a lot of them they don't know yet because they're in startup mode, but I will. So if any of you have negative thoughts or whatever, feel free to shoot them here so I can shoot yours down. But essentially, some of the more exciting updates is they showed a lot of progress on the giant steel moldings that they're working on with the CPC group. And to me, I just found it so encouraging, so inspiring, because it's like, this is an official, manufacturer. This is a company that has made Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and that kind of thing. And they're actually working directly with those teams on these big molds that will stamp together these carbon fiber SMC parts. And the fact that those are being put together now, and they've said they've received payment from the CEC grant, which is from California. And last week they officially submitted their application for the ATVM loan for the Department of Energy, which could potentially pay them hundreds of millions of dollars. They had a little section in their slide saying that depending on how the approval of that loan goes, there's a decent chance they could get all of the funding they need to start production from that grant. But again, a grant is still a little bit different from just like a straight up check, like Chris was saying on the webinar. It's still far more beneficial to just have an inspired billionaire just kind of show up and write the check, because then you have all the money right then and there. Whereas with the grant, it's like you have to pay for manufacturing equipment, and then it will be covered by that grant once you show the receipts and show that you have paid for it. So it's a little bit slower. That's why they're still doing institutional investors in the accelerator program, because you can make a lot more money much more quickly through that. So the way he described it was essentially like a four-prong rake approach to investors, like trying everything they can to secure funding, because of course getting an electric vehicle into production, even a super efficient one that's fairly low cost and even fairly low production capacity, is still very, very expensive. And these are not, rich billionaires that were sitting around, hey, we should make a car company. These are, in my opinion, a lot closer to middle class guys. Hey, Elzo, thanks for joining. He says, just finished the live webinar, Aptera on tooling and now Tailosive. I thought there was a lot more to it than tooling. They answered some questions at the end, of course, the one they gave in the title, that actually really encouraged me, because I was planning on talking about it at some point, but there's just so many other videos I was trying to get to between all of the stuff going on Tesla's website and Lucid's plans with the Gravity and everything. I have a long list of EV video ideas, but Aptera is definitely the one I'm most passionate about. But I think I did mention it in my video about Tesla. I think Tesla needs to put a bigger emphasis on software, and I acknowledge that they probably put a bigger emphasis on software than anybody, and yet I still don't think it's enough. I could still think of things that I wanted my Tesla to do, and I was like, no, it should be doing this, and I think there should be more designated teams so that, I don't think the guy that's designing the interior, like, blinker animation or where the chill icon goes, I don't think those software engineers are the same people working on robo-taxis, full self-driving, artificial intelligence code and machine learning algorithms and all that. I just have to believe that they're separate teams, and one feels a lot more understaffed than the other, probably because Tesla thinks robo-taxis are going to win them a big pot of gold soon, so that needs to take priority. But I don't believe that, so that's why I guess I'm more skeptical of it. But when asked about supporting Apple CarPlay and Android Auto on the Aptera, Chris said that they were in the process of working on that right now, and that Steve Fambro actually mentioned that their engineers are in communication with Apple on supporting it, which is a really, really great sign, because of course Aptera is not going to be in production in my opinion, later this year. I think they've been pretty clear that once they have all the secured funding they need, it's still like a 9-month process to get all the equipment in place and do crash testing and do validation and then actually deliveries. So I'm pretty sure that kind of rules out the chance of any Aptera production starting this year. So it sucks that we have to wait so long. I understand people's frustration, but from my conversations with both Jason Hill, their chief of design, and Chris Anthony, the CEO, I can tell you no one's more frustrated than they are. I mean, he openly said that on their latest webinar. He was like, no, I was ticked off that we couldn't convince enough investors to get on board with it. But you see what's gone on with the entire EV market. Pretty much all people are pulling out of a lot of EV stocks, even the good ones. You know, Tesla stock is way lower than it was a couple years ago. Same thing with Rivian, same thing with Lucid, same thing with Canoo, same thing with Lordstown. The capital markets, particularly in North America, have dried up a lot in regards to electric vehicle startups. It's just a risky business, and Aptera is just inherently a very different looking vehicle that's very drastically different from everything else on the market. So people are skeptical, and people don't ask a lot of follow-up questions and stuff. But I was encouraged because I mentioned in my video about Tesla software not being emphasized enough that I think this is a potential concern I have for Aptera. I think Aptera has really great hardware, and that's where all their focus is on right now. And rightfully so, when you're a startup and you don't have infinite money and you don't have a ton of funding, you have to be smart. You can't blow a bunch of money on things that aren't bringing you closer to production. So I do think rightfully, with the money that Aptera does have, they are investing it on manufacturing equipment and tooling and all that production readiness that needs to be done. And they're tackling the parts and components that are going to have the longest lead times, which I think is really smart. But regardless of them doing the right thing, considering their situation, given the context they're in, I do think that a potential concern that Lucid ran into, another big startup, was that they put so much focus on the hardware, and when they first started deliveries, the software was very neglected, and that resulted in a very poor experience for those first owners. That took like sometimes a minute for the car to just boot up. There were bugs all the time. There were software glitches all the time. So it was a huge concern because Lucid didn't think putting a big emphasis on software, at least at first, was going to be a big issue, but it ended up being a much bigger issue over time that they had to address. So that was my concern, is that, okay, well, Aptera is being all capital efficient and smart and focusing on production capacity and everything, but that likely will mean that the software, at least in the first delivery vehicles, are likely not going to be that great, and they're going to have a lot of bugs and a lot of problems that need to be addressed. But I thought Chris's comments on the CarPlay and Android Auto today were great, because he says, you know, our focus for the software is very much on showing how the vehicle's performing and all the controls, right? You're going to change your direction on the screen, just like a Tesla Model S or X. And you'll have your efficiency on the screen and your solar and your hatch controls and everything. So he said, but for everything else, like entertainment, media, navigation, that's a lot of work. And we think that just by supporting CarPlay and Android Auto, that can help us find a good shortcut to enabling the car to do all of those things that we expect our electric vehicles to do these days, without having to burn a bunch of software engineering and resources on navigation, whether it be Apple Music support or Spotify support or all that. If they just support the CarPlay, then basically the phone can do the heavy lifting for them, which means that the software team is less stretched out. I still don't think that means it'll be perfect. I don't think Aptera's software is going to be, you know, industry leading. But I think more people will be willing to put up with that, considering the pricing. Aptera, especially when you factor in cost of ownership, which you always have to. I keep trying to tell people that, and I'm probably going to get into it with someone in the comments about that soon. You have to factor in cost of ownership with vehicles. If you don't, it's very stupid, in my opinion, because people do not buy cars and just have them sit, do nothing for years and years. That's not how we use our cars. We buy cars so that we can ride around in them. So if one car costs substantially more than the other, like that's the situation we're in right now with gas vehicles. Sure, you could buy a $10,000 gas car, and that's going to be basically cheaper and have better range, and probably even a bit more utility than an electric vehicle you could find for $10,000. But that does not mean that, or an electric vehicle you can find for $15,000. But that does not make the gas vehicle cheaper. It makes the entry price lower, but if you're spending $200 a month on gas, that's $2,400 a year. After 5 years, you've spent another 10 grand. Versus if you have an electric vehicle, which is using less than $100 of electricity, or in the case of the Aptera, next to no electricity, entry price might be a bit higher than most people are comfortable with because it's a two-seater and a three-wheeler and it's a little different. But when you look at how, even if you were 100% charging the Aptera purely off of coal power, and we pretend that the solar doesn't work at all. Let's say you live in a place where there's zero sunshine. You live in Antarctica, right? Even then, the Aptera is going to use a fraction of the energy because of its aerodynamics and weight savings, the structural battery pack, the carbon composites. It's going to be so cheap to charge that thing that it would be basically less than half the price to charge my Model 3, and that's not even factoring in solar, which, by the way, even in cloudy climates, you still get some solar energy out of it. I think a lot of people have the misconception that just because it's cloudy out, that means there's no solar. That's not true. There's less, sure, you don't get as much solar energy, but there's absolutely still energy harnessed, even in cloudy climates. Okay. At what point does Tesla under lemon laws become reasonable for not releasing what they said? Smart Sum and Robotaxi beta is horrible. They've covered themselves legally, Daniel. I know that's kind of off subject from Aptera, but that's why I try to warn people about full self-driving and about buying cars because, oh, I want to buy a hardware 4 car, I want to buy whatever, is because Tesla has completely covered themselves legally. There's nothing in the fine print that says they are required to deliver you Smart Summon or Robotaxis by a certain point. If you go into the fine print of what is actually promised, they make it very abundantly clear that this is a level 2 driving assist function. It is not intended to be level 3. Elon makes crazy claims, but those are not legally binding, unfortunately. You could sue Elon, in which case he has a lot of money thanks to all of his Twitter subscribers. But no, there's no like lemon laws they fall into by not delivering certain false advertising. And hi from Norway, Snor Sindley. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Hey Ethan, how are you? What happens if Robotaxi can't run on hardware 3? Is that false advertising? Your car is going to be able to Uber you to make you $30K. Before you say hardware 3 is FSD capable, we don't know that. I know. I don't think anyone knows what is FSD capable because FSD hasn't been achieved. So we don't know if hardware 4 is capable of running it. The problem is, this is why I'm so anti-Robotaxi and anti-full self-driving. Like, before I bought my Tesla, I thought, yeah, maybe a couple months out of the year I'll subscribe, I'll pay the $200 and see how it performs. Now I'm not even interested in doing that based on the performance I've seen. I watch AI Driver, I watch Dirty Tesla's videos, I watch Omar's videos, and I really have come to the conclusion that I'm not interested in full self-driving unless it's level 3 or level 4. If it's doing all the driving, but I still have to keep my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, it's really not unlocking that much functionality. If anything, it just stresses me out because I'm constantly paranoid that the car's going to do something wrong. At least that's how it's been with autopilot and Navigate on autopilot when I had that. And honestly, I regretted subscribing to it the 1 month I did because I felt like, man, that was $200 down the drain, and it did not make the road trip experience more enjoyable. But the problem is, because Tesla doesn't put firm timelines on those FSD promises, they can essentially just see we'll get to that later. This exact same thing happened, if you don't believe me, this exact same thing happened with 2016 Model S's and X's. Back in 2016, that's when they started selling the full self-driving package, right? So when it came to full self-driving, they made the claim on their own website publicly that the Model S and X that was built in 2016 had all of the hardware necessary to for full self-driving, which, by the way, is factually not true now because Tesla has acknowledged that those vehicles need camera upgrades and full self-driving computer was needed to add later. And they claimed that, all of the hardware is necessary. So if you bought full self-driving, they would give you hardware 3 for free, but the wait time on getting new repeater side cameras continued to prolong. And then once you wanted to subscribe to full self-driving, they said, no, you need a hardware upgrade. So they went directly against their previous claims. If you don't think Tesla can make those claims, they absolutely can. And the problem is, for a long time, they didn't bring FSD beta to those old cars because the MCU was incapable of displaying the full self-driving visualizations. So even though we were seeing FSD beta updates on the Model 3 and the Model Y and the newer S's and X's, people were testing them. There were people who paid for full self-driving 7 years ago saying, hey, when am I going to get FSD? When am I getting beta? And Tesla just said, we'll get to that. Eventually we'll get to you. But they can put you on the back burner, which is why I'm so skeptical of telling anyone that, oh yeah, your car will eventually do XYZ if you pay for full self-driving. You really don't know. They could put you on the back burner for 5, 6, 7 years if they want to. And just say that, well, hardware 4 is our focus right now, so we're making FSD beta updates for hardware 4. Eventually we'll bring them down to hardware 3. What's to stop them from putting you on the back burner for 10 years? Legally, nothing. They can make you wait that long if they want to. And who knows, you might not even own the car by then. Can I ask you something about a car but not about a Tesla? If it's an EV, sure, Ravil. I only want to talk electric vehicles. If it's something about a gas vehicle, I don't really care. Hiking Lang says, on the positive side, I think Steve said they would be creating the first body parts this summer. That's correct. I noticed that. I caught that. Thank you for bringing that up. He said, so they should be able to get a few bodies to San Diego by the fall to help in the assembly line setup. I think that means, for those curious about crash testing, because I saw that it kept coming up in the live chat all the time. When are you going to do crash testing? When are you going to do crash testing? The reason Aptera has not done crash testing yet is because they don't have production-ready parts. So if you do crash testing with parts that are not production parts, the crash test is kind of pointless. Because in a crash test, you're trying to see what does a production-ready vehicle do. How does it crumple? How does it respond in a collision? And what goes on with those components? At least real-world crash tests. They've done software crash tests that look very promising, and I struggle to remember what they've brought up in the interviews, because we've talked about safety, both with Jason Hill and Chris Anthony. But they're, just for the record, I talked with the CEO of Aptera for like 90 minutes after we stopped recording, and he told me how much insane work went into the safety precautions of the Aptera. They're not just, even though it's an auto cycle with 3 wheels, they don't have to put in airbags, but they are. And they don't have to put a big emphasis on safety legally, but they're going to anyway because they know safety is such a big concern. So there's rollover protection, there's side impact protection, there's crumple zones. Actually, the outward mounted wheels, see, luckily I have a clay model here. I need to paint this. I'll probably paint it on a live stream eventually. I don't have like an Aptera toy model or something. I don't have a 3D printer. This is the closest thing I've got. See, when I say I'm an Aptera fanboy, they put the wheels on the outside of the vehicle like this because in a collision, there's basically no axle. There's no bar connecting these 2 wheels together. So in a collision, your snoot, the front end of the vehicle is going to crumple first, and it's not going to be pushing any axles or any motors or even the wheels, because they're outside, into the cabin space where the passengers are. So that design, while bizarre and a little bit different, and people are confused, why'd you put the wheels on the outside? That's actually a huge safety benefit. Also, in a side impact, the wheel is going to take the blunt of the collision rather than the passenger or driver door, which is what happens in our current vehicles. You get hit from the side, that car's going straight in through the door, and that's where a lot of collisions and injury takes place, is the bottom door hitting into the passenger, whereas the wheel takes the blunt of the impact from the side, and there's less axles and motors and wheels that get pushed into the cabin from the front. I'd appreciate it, but I don't have a good place for you to send it, an engineer. So there's, and also the roundedness of the Aptera chassis is kind of like the equivalent of, think of how like when you punch a beach ball, it doesn't absorb that much of an impact, composed to like if you punch a cardboard box, it's pretty easy for you, really hard. If you just take your fist and you punch a cardboard box, you're pretty likely to go through that box because it's flat. That's how a lot of cars are designed, unfortunately. Whereas if you're punching a beach ball with that same amount of force, it distributes that impact because it's rounded off. So the Aptera may bounce around a little bit in an impact, but the likelihood of the body pushing inward and damaging the occupants on the inside is decreased because of that impact. They talk about it in a lot more detail on Aptera Owners Club, another YouTube channel I recommend you guys watching, that goes into a lot of that goes into a lot of detail about everything Aptera. I'm sure Steve from Aptera Owners Club is going to do a huge breakdown on this presentation. He got a shout out during the live webinar, which was kind of cool. Elzo says thoughts on Open Pilot, 3 in the Aptera. It's really interesting. It's probably not the most elegant solution, but I like the approach they're doing because, again, in all aspects, everything Aptera does is focused on efficiency, and that's not just energy consumption. Okay, there's the product, which is very efficient, yes, but there's also capital allocation, how they're using the money that they have, because obviously they don't have an infinite bank account like Elon does, or for some reason Lucid does. I don't know why Lucid gets so much funding. I'm still perplexed by that. Aptera has a much clearer path to profitability than Lucid does, in my opinion. Based on the presentations I've seen. Lucid, I don't really understand why they're still around. Rivian has a bunch of cash to pull from because they got Amazon money. Aptera doesn't have this infinite bank account, so they're being very careful with their spending. And also, like we talked about earlier, with Aptera supporting CarPlay, that alleviates the pressure of the software team to develop media controls and navigation controls and third-party app support. By just supporting CarPlay and Android Auto, they offload a lot of that pressure, so now the software team can just focus on energy efficiency in the car and showing you car controls, opening the windows, opening the doors. By the way, that's kind of a weird thing. I don't know if you guys were aware of that. You roll down the windows of the Aptera on the display, which I'm not in love with that mechanism, but I respect it from the standpoint of that's probably more efficient. Now you don't have to put the little window control button on the door. You don't have to carve a little cutout in the door for the window control button. It simplifies manufacturing and it helps bring the price down. So I'm interested in the Open Pilot solution. There's a channel called the Aptera Brief, I think. Let me look it up real quick, make sure I'm shouting it out correctly. There's a channel called Aptera Brief that I recommend you guys check out. And he did a video. It's less than 5 minutes. It's a really short but very educational video. It's called How Will Aptera Integrate Open Pilot? And it's weird because Open Pilot, they technically aren't allowed to sell software. It's a crowd-funded, crowdsourced, software package that takes real-world miles driven. And if you've seen Open Pilot perform, it's not a new self-driving system. Again, this is how Aptera is so efficiency-focused. They said, rather than come up with our own in-house driver assistance functionality, let's integrate a third party's open-source, crowd-funded driver assist functionality. The problem is, for liability-wise, Open Pilot doesn't want to assume responsibility for that software, because, of course, it's beta, so it could make a mistake. They want you to be responsible for the vehicle and everything. All that Comma.ai can do is sell you this little camera system, and it usually mounts in current vehicles. Again, this is a real product that people have driven around with. It's not hypothetical. It's not like one day they hope to deliver products. No, this is a real product that people have tested with existing EVs and other non-electric vehicles. And it has ultra-wide camera and a little computer and a display that you plug in to your car, and then it does level 2 driver assist functionality. Slow down for cars in front of you, speed up when they start moving, and it keeps you in between the lines. And you can even adjust it a little bit. But what I love about it is its eye tracking. So I wouldn't, in this case, if you bought that's the tricky part that I don't think everybody is aware of. I don't think you'll be able to just buy the Comma 3 camera that you need for Open Pilot. I don't think that's just going to come inside the Aptera. For legal reasons, it will likely be very compatible with the Aptera, and you'll just be able to buy one from Open Pilot and then plug it into the car, and then it'll start working. But I don't think there will be any way for Aptera to deliver the vehicle with that hardware already included, which is kind of a bummer, because that would be the more simple, elegant solution. But again, this helps simplify manufacturing. This helps keep the vehicle cheaper. If someone doesn't care about self-driving stuff, I guess they don't have to pay the extra money for that hardware. Whereas in the case of a Tesla, even if you never turn on autopilot, you still technically had to take delivery of a car with hardware 3 and all the full self-driving computer and everything. What about rollover on three wheels? I think because of the layout of the three wheels, it's a very wide vehicle. Make no mistake. That's the funny thing, is a lot of people just assume, they see the Aptera and they go, oh, that must be dangerous because it's weird shaped and it's small. That's a death trap. But then at the same time, you have people complaining, oh, it's way too wide. It's like 85 inches wide. Okay, well, are you of the belief that it is too small so it is dangerous, or that it is too wide to be practical? It's like, sure, the Aptera is weirdly shaped, but it is not a small vehicle. It's quite large. It's wider than the Cybertruck. It's not as long as a Model 3, but because of how spaced out those wheels are and how low the center of gravity is, rollover, I think, is darn near close to impossible. I would say anything that can't... Nothing's impossible, obviously. Anything that could roll over the Aptera would basically probably kill any other car. I can't think of something that would flip it over, because it's not just aerodynamic front ways, it's also aerodynamics from the side. So the crosswinds should go right over the vehicle because of how rounded it is, in terms of its design. Let's see. Talking about level 2, Aptera is going to have comma 3. What are your thoughts on that subject? Yeah, you asked about that. I think it's the most efficient way for them to support driver assist functionality. Coming up with their own driver assist in-house would have cost far more money, and that they don't have, because they're a startup, so they don't have infinite money and everything. So I think that was the best way of going about it. It's not a super elegant solution. It's a little bit like jerry-rig friendly, you know? But I mean, Aptera's in favor of that. They all want like right to repair and you to be able to work on these vehicles yourself, and they're all about efficiency and all that. So I would prefer it, obviously, if it would be just like a Tesla where you just buy the car and it takes a couple miles for the cameras to calibrate, and then I just push down twice on the gear stock and now it's driving. That's the more elegant solution. That's not how it's going to work with the Aptera. You're probably going to take delivery, and it might have some basic, like, it might come with basic cruise control. I don't even know if it'll come with traffic awareness cruise control, but if you want actual level 2 driver assist functionality, you'll buy I forget what the camera's called. I think it's called the comma 3. You'll buy the comma 3, and there will be a slot behind the rear view screen. It's not a mirror. The rear view screen of the Aptera that you can slide that little computer thing into, and now it plugs in, and when you activate cruise control now, it's adaptive, and it keeps you between the lines, and you don't even have to keep your hands on the yoke. You can just watch the road, and as long as your eyes are watching the road, the car will keep doing the driving. To me, that covers the vast majority of what a computer is good at in regards to self-driving. FSD beta is just I'm sorry if I'm so pessimistic on it. It's just I've been following it for years, and it feels like it's never left the level 2 realm of autonomy. So forgive me for being skeptical, but FSD beta feels like a very, very fun party trick. Very expensive party trick. But at this point, it doesn't unlock anything in terms of functionality. It's just kind of cool to be like, wow, the car's doing all this driving, but you still got to sit there, you still got to look at the road, and you still got to keep your hands on the wheel. And it's $15,000. Like, come on. Let's get real. That's more than a lot of people spent on their last car. My dad did not spend $15,000 on his last truck. So the likelihood of that ever being... I guess that's why I'm so passionate about Aptera, is because great hardware, great efficiency, great aerodynamics, and lower cost of ownership. To me, that's more tangible. That's what I think more people are excited by. Vehicles that, like, I see, at least on my channel, I don't know about other channels, but on my channel, I see far more hype and interest in the Cybertruck than I do robo-taxis. People are excited to own their own vehicle that they can use. And what are people passionate about with the Cybertruck? They want the range. I want over 500 miles of range. I want the towing capacity. I want the armored glass. I want that bed space. I want a midgate so I can load things into it. People are passionate for the flexibility and freedom that electric vehicles unlock. And to me, that's what the Aptera is the epitome of. It's the freedom of not even having to plug in the car and have range far surpass anything else on the market. I talk about why I think range a lot of the time is overrated, but that's because I think a lot of the time we're talking about the differences between very small range figures. I saw a lot of people disappointed that when the Model 3 long range came back, people were like, hey, It's lower range than before. This sucks. It's like, okay, guys, you're talking about the difference of 358 miles versus 330. That's a 28-mile range difference. And it's like 11,000 with the federal tax credit. It's like $13,000 less than it was before. Like, there's substantial price differences for not that big a difference in range. Even for the back when long range was 358 miles or whatever, it was like, okay, I bought a Model 3 with 270 miles of range. The long range was 358. Okay, one's LFP, one's not. So the real world range difference is not that big. But with the Aptera, we're talking about a difference of, okay, you spend a couple extra $1,000, $2,000 or $3,000 more, and now you're getting 400 instead of 250. Now you're talking a difference of 150 mile range. Okay, that unlocks a lot, okay? That's not a small difference. Whereas before it was like, do you want to spend an extra $10,000 to get an extra 50 miles? And I'm like, no, not really. But it's like, okay, what if an extra $10,000 bought you 1,000 mile range versus 400 mile range? I'm like, okay, a bonus 600 miles, that's basically a day's worth of driving. That unlocks quite a bit. So I'm willing to acknowledge the benefits of the higher range EVs when we're talking about massive range differences. When people are splitting hairs at the difference between 270 and 330, I'm like, don't even factor it in at that point, especially once you do a road trip with it. You realize you're not driving it to zero and you're not charging it to full. So why are we factoring in little details like that? I like the idea of open pilot from a cost efficiency and scale standpoint. I think for the position Aptera's in right now is appropriate to accommodate for open pilot. I think that fits their needs the best. But when it comes to like ease of activation and user friendliness, no, it's not ideal that you're going to expect people to take delivery of the Aptera, buy a comma 3, install it themselves, and then turn it on. That's kind of clunky. But I acknowledge and respect that given the financial circumstances they're in right now, that's the most cost-effective way to do it. And I also think if you're just going for results, if you just want the self-driving system to be very capable and very practical, it's super smart when you can source a crowd-funded and already established self-driving system, opposed to starting your own from scratch, like what Ford is doing with Blue Cruise and Rivian is doing with Driver Plus and Lucid is doing with Dream Drive. That's so much more expensive, and it's just, frankly, it's not that good because you're starting from scratch. You have very little data to work off of. Aptera, which I think the plan is for it to have open pilot compatibility from day one, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but you could have a brand new vehicle on the road that has, from a brand new startup company that has never driven, technically with their production model, they have never driven a mile yet. And you've just first take delivery of that vehicle, and now it instantly has millions of miles of neural net training to teach it how to drive itself. In regards to just how well does the self-driving work, that is the fastest way to do it. I bet if Tesla let third parties access the full self-driving suite, and like you could buy a package from them and integrate it into your car and have access to FSD beta and everything, Aptera probably would have taken that if it was available. It's not available, so they can't, but the next best thing is open pilot. I would say that's probably the second best self-driving system available because it relies on user data, like actual cars driving around and teaching a neural net to get better and better because it's an AI company, obviously, AI. So I think they're doing everything right, essentially. Honestly, the reason we don't have an Aptera right now is not because of anything of Steve or Chris. It's because of investment going into the wrong places. Like, it drives me nuts to see billions poured into Lucid from the Saudis and hardly anything poured into Aptera from the same groups. And also the government. I know they're waiting on grants, and it takes time for these loan applications to be approved. At this point, I could be wrong. I've been wrong at things before, but I have faith. I think Aptera will make it to market. It's just going to take a lot longer than we want them to. like they said in the presentation today, from the Department of Energy loan they've applied for, that loan Steve from Aptera Owners Club dives into that ATVM loan that they've applied for, that Steve Fambro said today. They've submitted the application and they're hoping to get an answer back within the next 6 weeks. Because they're such an efficiency-focused startup, they need less money than any other startup. They're more of a grid-independent electric vehicle, which I think the U.S. government should be all in favor of supporting. The government wants to incentivize better efficiency, lower cost EVs that are available to more markets. I think they'll get approved. I see no reason why they wouldn't get approved. They got approved for the California CEC grant, which was like over $20 million. So if they're already getting government approval from certain grants, and this grant is supposed to be much bigger, I think they will get there. It's just, that's why they call it the accelerator program. The accelerator program is, yeah, we could do it through grants and government funding, but that's going to take a lot longer. So if we have an accelerator program where people are investing and we prioritize them with earlier deliveries, then we can get there faster. So I think, thank you to the accelerators out there, if anybody's watching, that have invested over $14 million in Aptera within the past 3 months. That has allowed them to work on their motor inverters that they showed today, their carbon fiber SMC molds. Those are very expensive and very time consuming to create, so I think it's really wise of them to focus on the production tooling that is going to have the longest lead time. So that's what we saw the updates of today. And of course, they could buy a lot more equipment and get a lot more manufacturing equipment ready if they had a big investor, because then they wouldn't have to wait around for these government grants. But I try to remind people, because I see people in the chat all the time that are like, not this chat so much, but on the Aptera chat that are like, when are you starting production? When are first deliveries? Oh my God, you delayed it again. Oh, you were supposed to deliver it last year. They know, they're aware, they're frustrated too. But keep in mind, Tesla in the early days, they also had several delays. The Model S was supposed to come out in 2011. Model X was supposed to come out in 2014, I believe, and then it got pushed to 2016. And they relied very heavily on government funding too. If it weren't for some electric vehicle grants that were issued to them, they basically wouldn't exist. That saved Tesla from bankruptcy at several points. And yes, they did pay back those loans. I understand they paid back the loans early with interest and everything, but there was a lot of government support that helped Tesla get where they are today. And I just think it's a little unfair that a lot of people hold Aptera, which is a very small, very efficiency-focused EV startup, which doesn't qualify for a lot of the same funding that other EV companies do and doesn't get the same investors that other EV companies do. They hold startups like Aptera to the same standard as like an established automaker like Tesla. Why haven't you delivered anything yet? Tesla's delivered cars. Why don't you deliver? It's like, it takes a while before you actually have an income stream. Every startup company is dependent on investor success. So yeah. And Bruce Nelson, very passionate Aptera fan. I love seeing you in the chat. He says, I love that you are excited. My interest is that it will meet needs as a couple, but also that as it replaces less efficient vehicles, it will begin to slow environmental damage. Absolutely. Like, to me, it's the epitome of what this whole EV transition is about. That's what drives me nuts about all these other, like Lordstown, Lucid, even Canoe to a certain extent, which I'm a shareholder of, which is not a flex, by the way. That is like an admittance of failure. I should not have bought Canoe stock, but I did. All those companies, if they go under, there's going to be alternatives. There's alternatives to the Lordstown, and there's alternatives to the Canoe. They're not going to look as weird as the Canoe, but there's alternatives for practical vehicles or electric delivery vehicles. There's alternatives to the Lucid Air. There's going to be other electric sedans out there that have a focus on luxury. If Aptera doesn't make it, there's no alternatives. No one else is making what Aptera is making. And the entire purpose of this EV transition, we are not switching to electric vehicles so that we have better performance. We are not switching to electric vehicles so we can have more luxurious interiors. We are not switching to electric vehicles so that we can have more utility, so we can have more frunk space. No, the whole motivation behind switching to electric vehicles is efficiency. They use less energy. They're better for the environment. They're more compatible with a greener grid. and they support more energy independence. We don't have to rely on foreign oil and pumping out dangerous toxins out of our vehicles every time we drive somewhere. And no one is more focused on the core mission behind the EV transition than Aptera as a startup, because their focus is on efficiency, but also I would argue Tesla as well, because Tesla is just all about like how many can we deliver. Because they started earlier than everybody else did, and obviously they've been building EVs basically longer than anyone else has, at least profitable EVs. GM kind of started EVs and then killed them off, and then, oh, actually, we were right, let's bring them back. You know, it's kind of a messy story with everybody else, but Tesla is all focused on scale. Aptera's focus is, I think, just as important, but not as flashy or maybe not as profitable. Like some people just look at Aptera and say, why aren't you making as much money as Tesla? You should be super profitable. What's your path to success? Aptera's mindset is not to make a bunch of money. At least that's not what I captured from my interviews with the CEO and stuff. They're more passionate about just efficiency, especially if you look up Steve Fambro's career. He focused a lot on vertical farming and food, the food industry, agriculture, and finding more environmentally friendly ways to grow food, and more sustainable ways to harness that industry. And they both have a passion for efficiency, and their goal is not to become the largest automaker. Their goal is not to deliver the most EVs possible. Their goal is to make the most efficient vehicles possible, which for those of us that prefer the more efficient, because that tends to mean the cheaper. And I also think, like, it kills me that we haven't pioneered more solar tech on electric vehicles. You know, I talk about it on my Talos of Life channel as to why I haven't bought solar for my house, but I'm still very much a believer in solar as a technology. You know, we can't make free energy with gas vehicles. That just the car cannot fill itself up when it runs on gas. The car can't even really fill itself up when it runs on anything else. Hydrogen fuel cells can't self-charge, self-fuel themselves just by sitting there. I don't know what else you want to use. Water-powered vehicle or something. Diesel power. You know, there's no other vehicle out there that can just fuel itself. But Aptera can. Because it's electric and because it's super efficient, that's when solar starts to make sense. And I think there's a very, very specific design you have to go with, and a very, very specific shape and market you have to cater towards in order to make solar practical on an electric vehicle. And I feel like Aptera's figured it out, and basically no one else is doing it. So it kills me that this is the only company really trying. And that's why I guess I'm so passionate about them. But Tesla was far closer to failure than Aptera Corp has ever been. I worked across the street from them and saw events unfold firsthand. No, yeah, Tesla was on the brink many, many times. Best news from the live stream for me was the ATVM loan progress. Seeing so many more dies was excellent, and some parts by summer was very encouraging, believable since they showed the tools. I agree, and I'm one of those people that is normally pretty skeptical of EV startups. You know, I was very critical towards Nikola in the early days, and Lordstown as well. And it seemed like a lot of my skepticism ended up being right. And just so we're completely clear, I do not get that same vibe at all from Aptera. And you can consider me biased because they came on our channel and they have a referral program. Sure, consider me biased. I'm willing to admit I'm an Aptera fanboy, and I'm probably willing to look past and look by a lot of mistakes they make for the sake of, yeah, but they're just so cool, and they're going after a market that I think is criminally underserved and super much bigger than people realize. I don't like it when people call Aptera niche. I know a lot of people probably do. I've probably referred to it as kind of a niche market myself, but the more I think about it, I'm like, you know what? No. We don't know what the true market of an Aptera vehicle is, because no one's ever made a car that can charge itself by sitting doing nothing, just sunshine. There's never been a car that could self-fuel, self-charge. That's never existed. So to pretend we know what the market is for it, in my opinion, is arrogant or ignorant or whatever you want to call it. In the same way, like, Tesla, a lot of people ruled off in the early days. And I'm honestly like, I remember following Tesla when they were less mainstream, before the Model 3 came out and everything. And there was a lot more people dismissive of electric cars being the future at all. And they were just like, yeah, no, I mean, you can't build them profitably. The range won't be good. The charging is too slow. And the temperature affects the battery performance and all that. But even if Tesla could make a $50,000 EV, people aren't going to spend that much money on a car. Like, most people want a car that's cheaper and everything. And we got the market so wrong, because what Tesla has proven, that I think is why I'm so excited and pumped for Aptera, is that people will spend more money than they ever have before to get something that unlocks a bunch of functionality and use cases that wasn't previously available. I definitely never had plans on buying a $50,000 car before Tesla. I pretty much only bought like $4,000 cars before Tesla. And I knew a lot of people in my personal life that had never spent that much money on a car before, but because it was a Tesla and because it was electric, they were willing to spend that extra money. Because they knew that the cost of ownership would be lower and they wouldn't have to pay for oil and changes in the brake pads and the gas and all that. And they could just plug in from home, and that's more convenient, and the supercharging and everything. So now what Tesla has proven is, even though they have a Model Y that most people are probably spending on average $45,000, $50,000 on, that's become the best-selling vehicle, which is still far more money than what the previous best-selling vehicles were. So in a similar way, I'm not saying the Aptera is going to become the best-selling car in the world, but I do think that it will, once it makes it to market, I do think it will become the best-selling three-wheeler in the world. And arguably, I think it will probably become the best-selling two-seater. That's really the biggest compromise I think it has, is that it can't sit more than two people. But they've talked about that, just like they did in this presentation, that they have plans for other vehicles in the future that will probably sit more and probably look a bit more traditional. But that's not their focus, because Aptera is an efficiency-focused brand. So I think once they're out there, there's going to be a whole other wave of demand. And Aptera has, they said today, actually, they reported they've gotten over 42,000 reservations now. Way more than Lucid has, by the way. And Lucid's losing money on every vehicle they sell, whereas Aptera's, I think, are much more profitable, even at lower pricing, just because of how simple they are to produce and how much. The battery pack's the most expensive part. Lucid has to put 118 or 112 kilowatt hours in every battery pack that they sell. Aptera is targeting 40 kilowatt hours on their launch edition, and on the lower trim after that, it's going to be like 20 kilowatt hours. 20 kilowatt hour battery pack in a vehicle that probably will cost around $26,000 or $30,000. There's so much more room for margin in there for me. In our country, they made the Lightyear. In my country is the other solar vehicle. Yeah, I don't even really consider that one, because it's like $200,000. It's like a toy. It's like you defeat the whole point of efficiency. The reason people want efficient vehicles is so they don't have to pay as much to use them. So if your efficiency-focused vehicle costs $200,000, you'd have to drive it like 2 million miles before it was actually saving you money. But thank you, Albert, for the super chat. If smart cars never made it in the U.S., why do you think this company is going to do it? Did smart cars charge themselves? That's one question that I think we all know the answer to. I think also smart cars put a lot less emphasis on storage space. Aptera has 32 cubic feet of storage. The smart car does not. I know the smart car was more efficiency focused than most, but it would still, most of them were gas vehicles, and the range was also not that great. I think, what was the range of the, I don't even know. I know the electric range of the smart car was under 100 miles. So it was basically reduced to a commuter vehicle, which most Americans don't buy, unfortunately. It was also a little bit tacky. It had a stigma with it. Range of gas smart car. I'm guessing about 350 miles, which is pretty good. So pretty efficient, but still not as good as the first Aptera launch edition. And again, most of the reservations for the Aptera are for range options that are over 400 miles. There's a 600-mile range Aptera that has a lot of interest, and a 1,000-mile range Aptera, which basically is unheard of. Even for gas cars, it's rare to find a gas vehicle that could go 1,000 miles. So the range was not there, and it still was a combustion engine, which in general most people I don't think like dealing with. There's still oil changes, there's still brake pads you have to worry about with a smart car. I also don't think they were as safe as the Aptera was, or is going to be, I should say. But yeah, I think the Aptera community is much stronger than that. That your smart car did not charge itself. There's a very big difference between efficient, like you only have to go to the gas station every so often, and you just plug in from home, and then you get into what if you don't even have to plug in from home? That unlocks a whole different audience or customer base, because there's a lot of people that live in apartments or don't have a good home charging scenario. So I think the Aptera would immediately be a lot more appealing to people that can't charge from home, because they could just rely on sunshine. It's still uncertain that the future will be all electric. I beg to differ, especially when there's as many countries as there are that are all putting mandates on the ban of combustion engine vehicles. If the government is banning the sale of gas vehicles and hydrogen isn't going anywhere, which in my opinion, it isn't. I've seen so little progress on hydrogen fuel cell vehicles over the past few years. I think it's pretty obvious that the future is electric. Tor Aspen says, what are you thinking about Toyota going for gas cars instead of electric cars? I think it'll backfire. No pun intended. And it will end up being a mistake. I don't think it's a good move on their part. I think that their margins are likely not great in the first place, and with so many mandates already pushing for all electric vehicles, and Tesla working on their next generation vehicle platform, which, if you're looking for a company that's just going to make all the money, and that's your goal, is just what company do I invest in to get the best return on my investment? I don't think it's Aptera necessarily. I don't think their roadmap or their mission statement is exclusive to making a ton of money. Tesla's is, though. Tesla's pretty much all about saying whatever they need to say to convince you that they're going to be the biggest company on Earth. And for the most part, I believe them. I may not believe the Robotaxi stuff or the Tesla bot stuff, but I do believe that they're going to have the best margins and they're going to sell the most. They're a company that prioritizes software as a service. They're all about vertical integration, and they're continuously scaling up production at more and more factories. So if you're just looking for which company is going to make the most money, it'll be Tesla, and they're going to have consistently higher margins. They're already outselling Toyota, and they don't have any plans of slowing down. So I think they'll likely just get bailed out. I don't think Toyota will go under. They're just going to have to rely more on government bailout programs because they're too big to fail at this point. I don't believe Tesla when they say the Model Y is the best-selling car in Europe, surpassing 9,000 euros or the 15,000. Okay, so you think they're lying on public documents then? Is that the logic? I mean, surpassing 9,000 euros, 15,000. I mean, if you have proof, if you have registration data that says otherwise, I mean, I guess sue them, because that's they would get in massive trouble if they lied on investor documents. There's whole government agencies designated to attacking companies, basically, and penalizing companies for making false claims on investor documents. And it's an investor shareholder deck. That's what it's called, that I reference whenever I say the Model Y is the best-selling vehicle in Europe. It's a shareholder deck that states the Model Y was the best-selling car in Europe, at least during the month of January or something. Tesla makes claims that they can't keep up with, but there's a difference between saying we want to eventually make robo-taxis and the Model Y was. Tesla lies a lot on forward-looking statements, but if they lie on previous statements, previously made statements about data to back it up. I mean, if you have data, show me the data, but don't just say, I think this car sells better because it's cheaper. That's not data. That's just you not doing due diligence. Sorry if I believe that Tesla, a publicly traded company, part of the S&P 500, is doing more research than someone that says, "Oh, I don't think so." Let's see some data to back it up. Fizz Whistle says, any news on the Aptera off-road package? It'd be nice to be able to take the wheel pants off when I arrive close to camps on dirt roads. I've botted out my Model 3 on some of those roads. Geez, off-roading with your Model 3. Well, the closest we got to an update was this image that they showed us during the live webinar today, which I thought was really cool. It's the thumbnail for this live stream. This is our first look at the off-road package. So you can see the wheel pants are higher off the ground, as are the back. They have a little bit different tires on there. So that's pretty much the closest we've got. It's a Jason Hill rendering, but I think it looks great. I honestly would be curious of the differences in efficiency if they just standardize that height, because that looks like it could handle so much better against speed bumps, potholes, and sure, off-road scenarios. I question how much worse the efficiency would be with the legs, the pants, and everything lifted up like that. But yeah, that was cool. I was not expecting to get new Aptera renderings today. Let's see. Full of information, clear explanation of things that are important to me, like Aptera. Well, I'm glad there's a lot of Aptera fans here, because I would rather have a big, passionate Aptera fanboy community than a big Robotaxi community, because honestly, we would all be a lot poorer, because we'd all have spent $15,000, and we'd all be a lot more disappointed, because Elon's been saying full self-driving will be ready later this year for the last 7 years. So I think it'd be a lot more disappointing than this following Aptera development and seeing actual molds be made and actual solar development and prototypes being shared around. Aptera is projecting 25% profit margins on their vehicles. I wonder where you heard that. I heard them say 15% or 15 points of margin. I'm not exactly what Chris meant by a point of margin. I took that as a percent. But he said they wanted to run their business kind of like Costco, where they structure their margins to lock in at a specific rate so that they know we're not price gouging their customers. Mike in the Woods says, I was having an argument on Reddit with a guy who thinks Toyota is going to win in the long term with hybrids. Despite the data I showed him showing Tesla's dominance, he flat earth mode on hybrids. Well, okay, I will acknowledge there's some advantages to plug-in hybrids. Like, I know a lot of people interested in the latest Prius because it's got like 40 miles of range on just the battery. So it's like, okay, you don't have to haul around as big a battery pack, and you just use the combustion engine on road trips, so you still got the range. And then for daily driving, you just use the battery pack. I understand the logic with why some people think that's better, but the demand isn't there to support that argument because, again, Teslas are outselling hybrids. So it doesn't really, or electric vehicles and whole. We have the battery. The other issue I take with it is it makes the assumption that we can continue relying on a gasoline infrastructure, which I do not believe in. I want to get off of. The whole reason I wanted to buy a Tesla was because I knew I wouldn't have to go to gas stations again. If you buy a hybrid, you go to the gas station less, but you still go to a gas station, which is like, yeah, better, okay, but there's way more people buying full electric vehicles now than there are people buying hybrids. So I think it's partly a maintenance thing. If you buy a hybrid, now you've got a combustion engine to maintain and you've got a battery pack to maintain. So now you got to do both. You got to plug it in and you got oil changes and you got transmission, head gaskets and everything that can go wrong. So it's better than full gas. I acknowledge that, but it's not better than full electric. And there are issues with going full electric, I understand, like the weight, like the availability of batteries and the charging. But I don't believe the solution to that is just giving up and saying, well, for those scenarios, just use a combustion engine. No, the solution is more DC fast charging, more availability of cells with different chemistries like lithium iron phosphate, which are more affordable using less rare earth materials, no cobalt, no nickel, so you can lower the price. There's solutions that don't involve falling back on the gasoline infrastructure, which I'm not a fan of. I hate the gasoline infrastructure. I hate gas stations in general. Supercharging's fun. I don't know what it is. Something about not having those big pumps and the spilling the gas and all the buttons you got to press and the different octane levels. And I don't know. It's just fun to go into a supercharger and just grab a cable and plug in. Never having power, just using the sun is a beautiful idea. Yeah, I think it is. And I'm kind of like the Patrick, was it Patrick Star? Why aren't we funding this? You know, like why isn't there more big investor push towards Aptera? I'm as confused as they are. Like I honestly respect both Steve and Chris have a lot of experience. They both have run companies in the past that have gone public and have been successful. I was actually talking to my brother-in-law recently because he works in the forklift business, and I was like, "Hey, have you heard of Flux Power?" And he was like, "Yeah, I don't work with their forklifts that much, but I know who Flux Power is." And I was like, "Okay, well, I got to interview the guy who founded Flux Power, which is Chris Anthony, who's now working on Aptera. So these guys have made real products and services that they've delivered to people. These are not just like nobodies that got an idea once. Trevor Milton, excuse me. It's light off-roading in my Model 3. I only have light scratches on the bottom of the front bumper from steep hills on back roads. Jeez. Well, too fun. Yeah, Scion, I was sad to hear about Sonos Scion not working out, but I also think that they were going about it the right way. I didn't like the product that much. They were just trying to make a normal-looking vehicle that happened to have solar, and I didn't think that... So the range advantage of the solar was not that great, and it didn't stand out as much as the Aptera does. I don't think Sonos Scion was targeting 100 watt-hours per mile, whereas Aptera, I actually think the engineering research, based on the data I've seen of aerodynamics mattering more and more at highway speed, and rolling resistance being a big factor, and there's less rolling resistance with the three-wheeled vehicle, and lower weight thanks to the structural battery pack and the carbon fiber SMC structure pieces. That's what they're working on. That's what all the production tooling updates were on. I'm seeing the numbers add up, and I'm like, sure, while we haven't had like a Delta model actually drive 400 miles, the math checks out. And 700 watts of solar looks believable to me based on the number of cells that they put on the vehicle. Put it on the hood, put it on the dash, put it on the roof, put it on the hatch. I think it should be done. Sorry if I'm not jumping at your question, Ravel. It's because it's about a hybrid. They need my final confirmation about only hybrid or plug-in hybrid. I'm really confused. How much different does it make in daily use? Hey, I get to pull the "this is an EV" channel. If a hybrid is relying on a combustion engine, I don't know much about it. So sorry, I don't have answers for you. That's why I'm not answering your question. Do you ever think you live in a bubble and you don't realize that the majority of people on Earth still buy cheap ICE cars? The Sandre is the most popular car in my country, Morocco. No, I don't try to pretend that most people are buying EVs, but I think it's a little bit naive to come to a channel dedicated to EVs and ask why we're not talking about combustion engine vehicles. It's because those are yesterday's technology. I'm not interested in combustion engine vehicles. I don't want to talk. We're transitioning right now, and we're early in the adoption phase. I understand that EVs still make up a very small percentage of total car sales. I say that all the time. That's why I say that most EV companies should do what Aptera has done, switch to NACS. There's no point in trying to salvage this CCS infrastructure. CCS is crap. The cable's bulky. It has amperage limitations. The network for it is garbage. That's why I'm pushing Rivian, Lucid, Ford, GM. Everybody should be adopting the North America charging standard. It has much better overhead. It has vehicle-to-grid capabilities. There's no amperage limit. There's a better charging network in place for it already. The reason I advocate for NACS so much is because I do acknowledge we are very, very early in the EV transition. I talk about EVs on the EV channel, but I'm not trying to make the argument that most people are buying EVs. I know that's not true. Most people are buying cheap gas cars, which I was buying cheap gas cars before I bought my Tesla. I understand that's where most people are right now, but I don't have enough money to buy a fully EV vehicle. Then I would say go with a super cheap used gas car. I wouldn't say go with a new hybrid if you can't afford a new hybrid isn't even that much cheaper than a full EV. You're saving a couple $1,000s, but then you're going to probably spend over the life of the vehicle more money on that on gas. I wouldn't buy a plug-in hybrid personally. My instructor said I'm a dangerous driver. I wasn't enjoying it much. Reaction was slow. I gave up, but yeah, I'm not sure if I should try. What are you talking about? Doing my driving lessons, I was struggling on automatic car. I was basically memorized my theory to pass, but didn't understand. What are you talking about, automatic? You can get cheap EVs too. Early model Nissan Leafs. Also, Chevy Bolts, while they're going to stop selling them later, you can still get them for like under $20,000 with the federal tax credit. It said about the Model Y being the best-selling car in Europe. I'm saying we have data to back that up. There's registration data. You can look it up. The Model Y was the bestseller. I haven't seen you reference any. You're just making projections. That's all you're doing. You're just saying, I don't think it's the bestseller because I think more people buy gas. Okay, based on what? Oh, I just think it. Okay, that's not evidence. That's called anecdotal. Let's see. Buying a Tesla was a great car buying experience. I agree. Not having to go to the dealer is much nicer. Ford made an EV version of the Ranger pickup back in the late 90s. Used lead acid and then, I don't know what, nickel manganese H, still an active community keeping them going. I didn't know about that, but that's cool because my first vehicle was a Ford Ranger. I was doing my driving license in an automatic car. Aren't most cars automatic now? Thoughts on a plaid Model 3 in the future? I don't think it's necessary. I don't think the Model 3 is big enough. The Model S is much wider than the 3 to accommodate for that dual motor powertrain. So I think you would have to change the Model 3 design a lot to support the plaid powertrain. Also, that's a side of Tesla's business that I'm not that interested in. Because again, my obsession when it comes to electric vehicles, nickel metal hydride. Thank you, Mike. I didn't know that. My obsession with electric vehicles comes from the efficiency focus, and everything when it comes to performance EVs is about abandoning efficiency for the sake of I want to go faster. And I still think my EV, which is incredibly fast, at the same time it's the slowest Tesla they make. So I already think they go faster than they need to. I've been in dual motor Teslas that go much faster than my car. I don't understand the obsession with doing 0 to 60 times in under 2 seconds. I don't understand the obsession with needing to go faster. I don't have a passion with track cars. I was never into car racing or anything like that. I've always been into, hey, people die in these things every day. Let's focus on safety, and then especially when we're in tough economic climates with rising interest rates and the recession and everything, I think there needs to be more push by the general public and education systems and on media, social media like this or YouTube or whatever. I think in general we need to encourage people to be more financially responsible. So that's why I push more towards efficiency. I think Aptera has the potential to be the most cost-effective vehicle ever, based on how long it should last and how it could potentially cost nothing to charge. Depending on your use case for it. There will occasionally be times to plug in, but even then, again, like I said, even if you exclusively plugged in your Aptera and there was zero solar on it, it would still cost less than half to charge than my Model 3, which is the most efficient vehicle on the road, under $90,000. There's technically some Lucid Airs that are a bit more efficient than my car, but they're like over $100,000, so the argument's kind of totally different. I don't love Lucid all that much, to be honest, but have an appointment today to see a 2015 Leaf that I'm going to trade in my second car for. Oh, interesting. I want to see how that goes. Your whole channel is speculative talk, and now you're telling me this. We speculate on what we don't know. We don't speculate on proof that... I don't speculate on what the energy efficiency of my Model 3 is. I look at the data. When there is data, you no longer need to speculate. It'd be like me speculating on how much the 4680 Model Y costs. You don't have to. You can look up... You go on the website and you see the price. You don't have to speculate on total vehicle deliveries when we have registration data to back it up. If Tesla was lying, why would they say the Model Y was the best-selling car in the U.S. minus pickup trucks? That points to some kind of data research being done. And again, there's massive SEC penalties for lying in a shareholder deck. If they were willing to lie and there was no penalty for it, they would just say Model Y is the best-selling car in the U.S., but they didn't say that. They said it's the best-selling car minus pickup trucks because there was data to back that up. I do feel two motors is very important because I live where it snows a lot and we have one motor Tesla and it was not that good in the snow. Well, I think there's a lot of issues with snow. I know people with rear-wheel drive Model 3s that live in Canada and drive it in snowy climates. And from the conversations I've had, they've said that, well, in those climates, you're still better off with snow tires, something with more traction. But I understand the appeal because some people don't want to mess around with snow tires, so they just get vehicles with all-wheel drive. But yeah, I understand all-wheel drive. Like, I don't think that's crazy for the markets that prioritize that. But the question earlier was about plaid in the Model 3. To me, plaid is nothing about traction control and all-wheel drive. That's just about acceleration and performance, which I think Tesla over-prioritizes. Like, especially right now, you know, they probably poured millions and millions of dollars of research into this plaid powertrain with the carbon fiber sleeved rotors and everything, and trying to get every tiny tenth of a second down off of the 0 to 60 time. Let's get this as fast as possible. And now they're struggling to sell them. They've lowered the prices on them over and over again, and the inventory keeps climbing for the Model S and X. Not that many people want to buy them because the Model 3 and Y are so much cheaper and provide so much similar of an experience. So it's like, okay, do we need to play around with this game of, okay, well, to justify the plaid Model S and X, we got to put more carbon fiber and make it more luxurious in the interior, and now we got to have, ventilated seats, and now we got to offer free supercharging, which is going to clog up the supercharging network unnecessarily. It's like playing this game of how do we justify six-figure vehicles. I'm not as interested in, because that's not we. If you're willing to spend over $100,000 on a vehicle, you've already been catered to. There's already plenty of EV options. You got your Mercedes EQS, you got your Porsche Taycans, you got your Lucid Airs now. You've had Model S's for years and X's for years. You've had options. What is not been provided options are people that are on a budget. Like many of you have said, I can't afford to buy a full EV right now. That's why I'm more interested in talking about Model 3, Model Y prices dropping, or Aptera, or companies that are catering towards demographics that want to bring electric vehicles to the masses. I don't care about rich people toys as much. That's not interesting to me. That's not as game changing. That's just, okay, the end result of that is basically, all right, I bought a plaid Model S, it's so fast, and then 3 months go by, and actually this new vehicle we came up with is a little bit faster, the Rimac Navara. Now it can do 0 to 60 in 1.89 seconds. Oh, okay, I no longer have the fastest car, so now I got to spend more money on a newer, faster car. Okay, now the Roadster came out, and it's got a cold gas thruster on the back that will shoot it like at the speed of a rocket engine. It's 0 to 60 in 1 second now. Oh, okay, well, that means Rimac Navara has to come up with a vehicle that has a bigger cold gas thruster on the back so it can do 0 to 60 in 0.9 seconds. It's just this endless battle of stupidity in my head. Like, why are we doing this? What's the point? Oh, I don't know. It's fun. I'm not even a roller coaster guy. I don't like roller coasters. But I like efficiency. I like both in all things, I like more efficient HVAC systems. I like my computer because it has a more efficient chip than a desktop, so I can get by with less power consumption on my computer. That's why I buy a lot of Apple products, is they tend to have custom silicon that consumes less energy. And I like Aptera for their efficiency focus, and just bringing more financial freedom, I guess, to the masses is what I feel like EVs unlock. Do you think one day we'll charge our car as fast as a gas car? I did a video on that. It's called, Will EV Charging Ever Beat Gas Pump Speeds? The short answer is I don't think it will, but I also don't think it needs to, because it's always going to be cheaper to charge a car overnight slower than it is to charge a car quickly. But I do think in our lifetimes we will probably get pretty close. The Aptera is in the best possible position, not from a kilowatt speed standpoint. You'd have to get into I think it would be in the ballpark of 6 megawatt charge speed to rival the actual energy transferred from a gas pump. But if that's a bad example in my opinion, because most of that energy in the gasoline is not used by the combustion engine. There's so much losses. There's so little efficiency with the combustion engine system that I think miles added back per minute or per hour is a better reference point to base off charge speed versus gasoline fill up. And with the Aptera, Chris Anthony in our interview on this channel referenced one day they hope with their 100 kilowatt hour pack, probably not in the near term future, this is future talk type thing, but he said theoretically a lot of battery packs these days can handle up to 2 or 3 C, which references how many kilowatts it can take in relative to how much energy it has total. So a good example would be 3 or 4C actually. Like a Model Y has an 80 kilowatt hour pack roughly. I don't know the exact, but it's around 80. A long range Model Y. You can charge that at 250 kilowatts, right, without severe damage to the battery pack. So that's close to 4 times how many kilowatt hours are in the pack, 250 kilowatts to 80 kilowatt hours. So if you took that same logic to the Aptera with the 100 kilowatt hour pack, you should be able to get that pack eventually one day to around 300 kilowatts. And if it's a vehicle that's super efficient like the Aptera is, that's still getting close to 100 watt hours per mile, 300 kilowatts translates to 3,000 miles an hour. A gas car at a gas pump is roughly 5,000, 6,000 miles an hour. So you would need a hyper-efficient vehicle with a big battery pack and fast charging speeds. That's how you would get closer to the gas pump. But I don't think that will be most charging. I still think most vehicles will charge from home, just off of a outlet or a level 2 charger. That's always going to be cheaper and more cost effective. And in the case of the Aptera, most of the charging will probably be done from sunlight. So it's a fun discussion to talk about, okay, look at how much energy I can transfer at a gas pump just by putting gasoline into a tank. That's cool. But when it comes to like electrons recharging a battery pack, just inherently it's a much more complicated equation. But I do think it will get to the point of similar speeds. Tor Aspen says Model Y was the best-selling car in Norway in 2022 and so far in the year 2023. That makes sense. There's just from the sheer, you want to talk about data, there's Giga Berlin is closing in on, I think they're over 300,000 vehicles built per year. And then that doesn't count Giga Shanghai, which is closer to 1 million vehicles built per year, and they're importing Model Ys to Europe. And then you have over 500,000. Now we're closer to like 700,000 Model Ys being built in the United States domestically. Just by production capacity alone, it's no question, it's no surprise that the Model Y is the best seller because they're building more of the Model Y than basically any other vehicle on the planet. Historically speaking, do the best-selling vehicles prioritize efficiency? It's a factor, yes. Disagree? No. I would say in the United States, at least, quite the opposite. Some of the worst-selling vehicles are very, very inefficient because in the U.S. we have this truck culture. That's why it's kind of interesting that Model Y, best-selling car in the U.S., excluding pickup trucks, because there's 2 or 3 pickup trucks that pretty much always sell. They're the top-selling vehicles in the U.S. It's the Ford F-150, the Ram 1500, and the Chevy Silverado. Those 3 basically occupy the top-selling spots, which is, I think, why there's so much interest publicly about the Cybertruck and everything, is because, at least in the U.S., we love our pickup trucks. In my opinion, more so than we should. There are some people that genuinely utilize pickup trucks and need them, and a lot of people that just kind of buy them as fashion pieces, just because they like the way they look. I see them all the time, unfortunately. Where I live, there's a lot of flashy, showy pickup trucks that you can tell they're never used for work. They just bought them because they like the way they look, which is unfortunate because it's a fashion piece that is bad for our atmosphere, bad for safety reasons. I don't think that gets talked enough about. Chris Anthony has brought it up in conversation several times, both with me and with others, that pickup trucks and SUVs, when they get past a certain size, they don't have to be tested safety regulation-wise as much as sedans do, because they're so big. It's like the Hummer EV. You can't find the Hummer EV on fueleconomy.gov because it's so big and so heavy. They're like, oh, it doesn't have to be tested. It's very bizarre lobbying that goes on by the big automakers that are like, okay, well, if I make the truck big enough, it doesn't have to be tested. And they're very, very dangerous, both for in-cabin safety and crash safety and pedestrian safety. And that's why it's so hilarious to me that people are so concerned about pedestrian safety with the Cybertruck. Cybertruck is honestly probably one of the safest pickup trucks ever designed because of that low hood line. It has much better visibility than a lot of pickup trucks do, which are on average killing more people every year because of poor visibility and their large front ends. But people just go, Cybertruck, sharp, pointy, that means dangerous. It's like, and crumple zones are still a thing. There any updates for CarPlay integration in Tesla? It's heard something about it forever. No, I don't know what you heard, but it's not true. Tesla has, and they've said on the record very publicly, very many times, they have no interest in adding CarPlay or Android Auto. Personally, I'm okay with it because Tesla does have a very good software team, and I think the Tesla operating system takes full advantage of the hardware available. So I don't think Tesla needs CarPlay. Aptera, I disagree a little bit. I think they could benefit a lot from CarPlay and Android Auto because of the financial situation they're in. They don't have infinite money to pull from. So Chris Anthony, I think, explained it very well on the webinar today. He said that by not having to focus too much on navigation and media apps. Our software team can focus more on energy consumption and vehicle controls. So they said right now they're actively working on CarPlay integration and Android Auto, so that the phone that most of us are probably using already can do a lot of the heavy lifting for navigation and media and music streaming and all that. Harry says, planning to sell my 2022 Model 3 long range and get the new Model Y long range. Should I do it? I wouldn't if I were you. I prefer the efficiency focused. I think sedans are underrated. I like my sedan, but I don't know what your use case is. Maybe there's benefits to having a hatchback. Maybe you need the extra storage space. But honestly, I moved a exercise bike, a pretty big one, yesterday from my sister's house. It's just one of those bikes you can unfold and pedal, and it's just like workout equipment. And we picked it up from my sister's house and just threw it in the back of our Model 3, laid the second row down, and I was looking back there. There's a lot of room in the Model 3. I don't think it gets talked about enough, especially if you're willing to fold down the second row. Maybe you have a family and you can't fold down the second row that much, but it's honestly quite spacious. You can fit a lot of stuff in there. Same story a couple months ago. We needed to pick up a filing cabinet from someone out of town. And my sister has a pickup truck, a kind of smaller one. And she was just like, should we take the truck? And I was like, well, how big's the filing cabinet? She showed me a picture. And I was like, yeah, I think that could fit in our Model 3. That way you don't have to. It was kind of a drive. It wasn't super close by. So I was like, we could take the Tesla. That way you don't have to pay for gas. And she's like, okay, sounds cool. I was like, if all else fails, we can come get the truck and do it again later. But we took the Model 3 up there. Sure enough, 3 people in the car, and we fit this whole filing cabinet in the trunk and brought it all the way back to her house. I think the storage space in the Model 3 is honestly quite good. And a lot of people just have the mindset of, oh, I need hatchback because more storage space. It's like, have you tried? What are you moving that often? Have you tried to fit it in a Model 3? I bet you probably could for a lot of circumstances. It might require you to get a little bit more creative with it. You might have to work a little bit harder to get it. Okay, we need to put it in at this angle. But honestly, how often are you moving things? Are you really moving furniture or filing cabinets or whatever that regularly? Maybe you are, in which case I'm not saying you're wrong to. I'm just trying to make sure the people that maybe are on the fence could, if I can push you to save money or to have a more efficient vehicle, I will. But if I don't push you on the fence, then I at least reassured you that the people who do buy the Model Y or the people that do buy a pickup truck are the ones who absolutely need it. But if I can put doubt in people's heads on whether or not they need to buy a more inefficient vehicle, then I would consider that a win. Yeah, I saw your video, Mike. You got his Model 3 rear-wheel drive stuck in the snow twice this past winter. Do you have snow tires on them? I'm curious. All the data about Tesla sales numbers comes from Tesla themselves. Not all of it. There are third-party registration sites that have reported the same thing that Tesla's reporting. I think you're too focused on Tesla's data is wrong, but you're not providing any data that proves you right. That's what you should be focused on. Pointing at other people saying, they're wrong, that doesn't make you right. It's easy to say someone's wrong. It's hard to provide evidence to prove that you're right, though. Ravel says, what is your take on Aptera's 3-wheel design on the icy surfaces, especially slopes? Will it result in slippage? Considering that all Apteras have at minimum 2 motors, but it should be all-wheel drive, I think that the grip should be pretty good. And the weight distribution should be pretty even as well. So it might be a little bit worse than a 4-wheeled vehicle. I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of experience with driving on icy roads, but my guess is it is not going to be substantially worse or horrible in the cold or the snow. There's actually a video Steve Fambro took when they took the Gamma prototype to Italy of it driving through the snow. Not at very high speeds, but I like watching it from time to time. There it goes. Man, it looks so cool. I'm sorry. I geek out about it. I love the slope line. I love that roof line. You can see, well, this one has a glass hatch. I guess it would be solar on most of them, but you can just see that little arch that goes from the front all the way. Look how rounded it is from the side as well. I don't think that gets talked about enough. Most cars do not have that rounded side profile. That helps a lot with aero and a lot with safety. Makes it kind of feel more plane-like, I guess. Um, do you think that's why people don't want to switch to electric because of the speed of charging? That's one of the reasons why my brother-in-law doesn't want to switch and most of my friends. I haven't heard that many people make that argument. Most of the people in my personal life are interested in EVs, but they just can't justify the cost. That's why I'm all in favor of lower prices, get those prices down. Because I know a ton of people, I can think of at least uncle, some friends in LA, some friends in Texas, and oh yeah, my parents. My parents have both said they want their next vehicle to be electric. And my cousin, who's just bought Tesla Solar, actually. All of them have said they want to buy a Tesla. They're just waiting for the prices to come down. Or if not a Tesla, an EV. Like my cousin has also expressed a lot of interest in Rivian. He likes the way they look and he thinks they're cool and everything. He just, you got to be realistic. If your barrier to entry is the cost, then Rivian's not going to be much closer than a Tesla. But everyone I know is pretty sold on the technology. They just want the pricing to come down, which is why I don't want Tesla to waste money on advertising, because I think there's a huge market of EV buyers that haven't pulled the trigger simply because of the pricing. And over time, that gets better because people are saving up money, and there's people that I've talked to friends that are like, yeah, I'm saving up for a Tesla, but it's going to take a while because obviously it's a very expensive purchase for most of us. Took me a long time to save up. So I don't blame people for not all buying them. But the point is you have to be realistic about it and say, like, how many people can we actually switch at a time? I'd feel one way if there were just a bunch of people buying new gas vehicles and hardly anybody buying EVs that could definitely afford the EV, but they're not buying it. But that's not really the situation. As the registration data has shown us, both from California and United States DMV registrations and European registrations and Norway, in many jurisdictions, very large ones, Teslas are the best sellers. Electric vehicles are selling at pretty high volume, at least Teslas are. And that's proof that, okay, most people in the market for a car that expensive are going with a full electric. There's obviously always going to be some people that don't go for a Tesla, and I don't think it's necessarily because of charging speed. It's all kinds of reasons. It could just be because they don't like the look. Maybe they don't like the minimalistic interior. Maybe someone wants something a bit more luxurious, or like Apple has told us, a lot of car buyers are only interested in cars that support CarPlay. So maybe they like EVs, but they won't buy a Tesla simply because it doesn't have CarPlay, or they don't like something Elon said, or whatever. They're worried about build quality. I think there's not one sole reason preventing EV adoption. There's a bunch of little reasons. But for the most part, let's just acknowledge and appreciate for a second that most Teslas are the top sellers, which means most people are being convinced to go full electric. They're growing faster than any other car brand. So I'm curious what these people in favor of Tesla advertising are hoping for. Do you want Toyota sales to drop to zero? Is that the goal? Because they're already dropping. Like, Toyota sales are already in the decline. Same with Ford, same with GM. And Tesla's growing and growing and growing. Is this not good enough for you? When is it enough? Is it when absolutely nobody buys any vehicle other than a Tesla? Like, because I don't believe that's reasonable. I don't think that'll ever happen. Regardless of EV or gas, some people are just, I know people in my personal life that are just diehard Toyota fans or diehard Ford fans. It doesn't matter if there's another vehicle that's cheaper or better in some way. They don't care. They just want to buy their family brand or whatever. I've always bought Toyota, so that's why I'm going to keep buying Toyota. I always bought Ford, I'm going to keep buying Ford. There's some people that are just always going to be like that, and there's no point in advertising to them. That's not going to change their mind. Tor Aspen says, what is the best way to charge a Tesla Model Y long range so often as possible every day, or have the battery mostly down to 20% and charge it up to 80%? Always be charging. That's what the user manual says. Plug it in as much as you can and set the charge limit to 80%. There's no advantage. There's no point in letting it get down below 50%. There's not really any battery health advantages to it. If you're going to leave the car for an extended period, if you're going to be away from the car for months and months, just leave it at 50%. Make sure Sentry mode is off. Sentry mode uses a lot of power. as I've discovered, because kilowatt hours are so expensive where I live. That's part of the reason I'm so efficiency focused, is because maybe in other states you won't care as much when you're only paying 6 cents a kilowatt hour. But where I am, I'm paying 25 cents a kilowatt hour for off-peak energy. It's horrible. It's very expensive here. So that's why I'm a bit more efficiency focused, and that's why I'm like, oh yeah, Drew, you could buy a Model Y and it'd have more storage space. I'm like, yeah, but if that uses more energy per mile, I'm going to be paying for it. So that's why I chose the most energy efficient vehicle I could that has NACS, because I don't want to deal with Electrify America and CCS and all that. So if what I realized when we had Sentry Mode turned on was that this was using like 4 or 5 kilowatt hours a day. If you have it on at your home location, which, because it's not like super locked away, we just left it on, but and it would capture, cats and stuff walking around the car and everything. But I realized 4 or 5 kilowatt hours a day, that's like $1.25 per day. That equates to $30 a month, over $30 a month just for Sentry Mode. So we just turn off Sentry Mode when it's at its home location, and that saved us over $30 a month in electricity charges. Philly Fan says, is there a big difference in range loss with the LFP battery in cold climates compared to the battery that's in the Model 3 Performance? I don't think there's a big loss in range, no, because LFP, I've driven it not in super cold, but kind of cold climates. And the bigger concern comes from charging speed, because battery packs like to be at a pretty warm temperature when they're fast charging. So that's more of the concern, and I experienced that on my last road trip. But I don't think it was as big a deal as people make it out to be. Like, yes, technically, I probably could have charged faster if I had 2170 cells, but still, I was getting the warning on my car that said your battery pack is colder than it should be, and that's why you're not getting peak charge speeds. But I was still charging at 120 kilowatts, 140 kilowatts, and I guess it could have been 200 or 250, but I don't think it would have resulted in that much of a difference in trip time. I still beat the range, the duration estimator, the map planner, route planner. That's what it is. I was looking for the right words. The route planner said it would take 16 hours for us to get to our parents' place out of state, and we got there in 14 and a half. So it'd be one thing if it thought we would get there in 14 hours and then it took 16 hours, and I'd be like, okay, well, LFP is causing some issues, but no, it's not that different. Let's see. My father doesn't want to switch unless they have a range of at least 1,000 miles. Do gas cars have that? I don't think so. Why doesn't Tesla have CarPlay and Android Auto? I kind of understand it. I mean, they probably have a different way of explaining it, but the way I understand it is that it requires a different operating system to take over part of the display, and then you have this weird handshake between. That's why there's so many issues with Electrify America, right? Is because you have one company handling the charging and a different company handling the car, and you get disagreements between the two, and it results in these signet surges where the charging speed's going up and down, or sometimes it provides too much power and then the battery pack shuts off and stops charging. So it creates problems when you don't have product symmetry. So when you have one company controlling CarPlay and one company controlling Tesla's operating system, and they're kind of competing with screen space, I don't know. I saw CarPlay on the Lucid and I wasn't terribly impressed with it, but that's mostly because Lucid's like $100,000 car, so I feel like the experience for it should be better than a Tesla, not worse. In regards to every aspect. Range should be better, charging should be better, software should be better, build quality should be better. Everything should be better with the Lucid if you're spending twice the money on the car, and that was not the case. The charging experience was worse, the software experience was worse, and in many cases the build quality was actually worse than Tesla, which I didn't think was possible. But with the Aptera, I'm willing to excuse some software bugginess or some build quality not being as great because it's so cheap. It's so affordable. It's like, okay, maybe it's not put together as well or built as well as a Tesla or a Lucid, but it's a fraction of the price and it's using a fraction of the energy. So I'm willing to excuse that, basically. Let's see. I hope to take my Aptera straight from the factory in Carlsbad to Death Valley to camp and will report on the experience. That sounds fun. I want to see that. Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah, I would love to pick it up from the factory too. Snow is much easier to drive on than ice. If you're on an icy hill, if you don't have chains for studs, you are definitely going to slide. Yeah, but that's the case with all cars. Every car will slip on ice. Yeah, you said that. Okay. I'm really curious to see how viable camping in the back of the Aptera will be, especially if the hatch is closed. Regardless, I can't wait for Aptera and efficient mobility. I think people tend to obsess over the camping thing a little too much because it's like, okay, if the hatch when closed is probably going to be a little bit claustrophobic because it kind of swoops down. So I don't know how practical it would be to camp in it with the hatch closed, but just camp. You know, most people don't camp in the car. They just bring a tent. You can bring a tent. The Aptera's got 32 cubic feet of storage space. Throw a giant tent and an air mattress in the back. You've got your solar, so I guess you could lay down in the back with the hatch open if you want more HVAC controls, but that's what... Sorry. If you want HVAC controls while camping, I don't think you really want to camp. If you want to go out and explore the wilderness, just bring a tent. And there'll be a little 12-volt outlet in the back of the Aptera. You can power your little stovetop on if you need to, whatever. There are some really big trucks that with really big fuel tanks that have 1,000 miles. I don't think pickup trucks. Are there? I think I've heard of semi-trucks having range that goes over 1,000 miles, but most of us aren't buying that. Do I think Hyundai is in competition with cars like Ioniq 6 or nah? Well, there's demand for them. I don't think EVs are all just competing with each other. They're competing with existing gas vehicles, and I think Hyundai and Kia are doing the right thing with their shared GMP platform. I've been less impressed by their software. I've watched a lot of videos because I was a big fan of the Ioniq 6 on paper. I saw the range, I saw the efficiency, and I was like, hey, if you don't want a Tesla, you want something with CarPlay or whatever, this thing's got over 360 miles of range, very aerodynamic, and it can still sit 5 people. Like, this is cool. And I watched a few videos on it, and the in-route trip planner and everything, it's pretty bad. It's kind of laggy. The software is really buggy, and it was encouraging the car to drive at, like, hotel parking lots. Like, it didn't know, like, don't go to AC chargers, just do DC fast charging. It didn't know that. And I was like, okay. It was, like, very, very bad software-wise. So I was less impressed by that. But overall, on paper, I do think it looks really cool. And maybe there's a lot of people that are willing to put up with Electrify America or just want CarPlay so bad they're willing to put up with crappy software otherwise. But there's clearly a lot of demand for the Ioniq 5s and the EV6s. I see them. There's a TV show we're watching with one of the people on the show. It's like a reality TV show where one of the people on the TV shows has a Kia EV6. And I see Ioniq 5s where I live pretty regularly. I see Mach-E's. So I'm not like super dismissive of the Tesla alternatives. I don't like the term competition because I don't think they're really taking anything away from Tesla. But yeah, I think they're cool. I think they just need a bit more focus on software. I'm guessing there may be a custom airbed to fit in the back of the Aptera based upon what I heard. Yeah, I listened to the Jason Hill interview as well. They'll probably have some camping accessories and stuff, but I just think people are over-obsessed with the concept of camping in the car itself. It's like, just, if the car doesn't work for you, just camp outside. Just pack a tent. The Ram 1500 claims 1,000 miles. Really? I have a friend with a Ram, and he doesn't get that. Let me look that up real quick. What is range of Ram 1500 gas? 500 to 570 miles. That's a lot. What if I do eco? Highway driving range in its class with over 950 miles. Okay. I've not heard of that. On a single tank. I wonder if it, yeah, I do question if it would actually get that, though. Eco diesel rated up to 26 miles per gallon at over 1,000 miles. Geez, how much is that fill up? So 1,000 divided by 26, over 38 gallons. So 38 gallons, let's say you pay $4 again. $150 at the gas pump. Jeez, that's impressive. PIF invested into Lucid because Saudi and the Middle East wanted to diversify from oil and go green, and also because of Lucid committing to their cause by making a plant there. Well, they invest into all kinds of EV stuff because they know they want to outlive gas. I know that. I've known that for a long time. That's why they're trying to turn the UAE into more of a tourist destination so that they can outlive the gasoline days. But I think there's so many better companies to invest in than Lucid if you want to focus on long-term sustainability. Like, I would focus in, especially out there. They get a lot of sunlight, right? Why wouldn't they want to dump all their money? Why aren't they dumping $1 billion into Aptera? It would require less upfront investment than Lucid requires. They could build more of them. They would be more profitable than Lucid is. And Lucid is already proving to have demand shortages. And they're very, very early in their production roadmap, and they're already experiencing demand shortages, which is not a good sign at all. So I'm confused why people want to dump more money into them when there's evidence, there's data that supports. There's a lot of people that they haven't even built that many cars, and they can't find people to buy them. So if you're only building, a couple thousand cars a month and you're struggling to find buyers for them, why are you interested in ramping up production? And they're losing money on those cars. They're not making money on the high price cars, so it's kind of hard to transition into lower price cars. Oh, okay, well maybe they'll get more demand when they get cheaper. Yeah, but they're going to lose more money on them. So I don't understand why Lucid has as much attention as they do. They have a very big, very passionate fan base that gets very insecure whenever you say something bad. They just immediately jump on you and complain about. I've seen you happen to me. It's happened to other channels I watch where if you can say good things about Lucid, but if you bring up one little criticism, they get all angry and upset at you. And I'm like, why is there so much love of this brand? Like, most of the people defending Lucid probably don't even have a Lucid vehicle. They want to eventually get one, but they can't afford one because the company prioritized too high-end a demographic. And most of the Lucid customers I've seen have said it's not as luxurious as a Mercedes EQS, and it doesn't have the charging network that a Tesla does or the software that a Tesla does. So it's kind of in this weird in-between zone where it's like, okay, it's more expensive than a Tesla, but not as luxurious as a Mercedes, and it doesn't have the tech as a Tesla. So what? It's kind of in this weird in-between zone. If I had to pay $150 at a gas tank and couldn't write it off for my business or something, I might cry myself to sleep. Yeah. That is not fun. Thankfully, even with our gas sedan that we had before our Tesla, we never had to spend that much at a fuel pump. But it was like $70-$80 usually every time we went to the gas station. Sony showed their EV car on an event. Do you think these companies can make it to production? Are they doing this for hype? I haven't followed Sony very closely, but they could probably make it to production, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're successful. Lordstown made it to production. That doesn't mean they're doing very well. Remember that. There is a very vocal minority of Aptera haters too. I think, unfortunately, most people just kind of dismiss Aptera, but yeah, I've seen people crap talk on them. And the unfortunate thing is most of the Aptera criticism is very, very poorly researched. Basically, I see people that diss on Aptera that just don't know much about Aptera, or I see people really excited about Aptera for those who have done the research. If you listen to the interviews and you watch the presentations from the co-founders, which honestly doesn't take very long, there's like 4 or 5 videos from Aptera Owners Club that you can watch and address pretty much 95% of people's concerns. I'm not trying to convince everybody to invest in Aptera. I'm not trying to say that they're a super safe investment. It is a startup. It's risky. You could invest your money and it could go away. That's possible. But as far as startups go, I think they're doing everything so smart. They're being so efficient about everything they can be efficient at. Going camping with my Model 3 by driving it to the trailhead and backcountry backpacking. Well, there you go. Then you camp out in the wilderness anyway. Let's see. I think I read that. I took my family to a road trip on a Model 3, and they really liked the car, but they were very disappointed on the charging speeds for the trip. Well, that's unfortunate. I'm surprised because I did a road trip with my family, and usually by the time the car was ready to charge, everyone was kind of ready to get out and stretch their legs or get some food or go to the bathroom. And that's usually what I hear. I usually don't hear people say, "Oh my God, the charging took forever." Your response is spot on regarding most Aptera criticism. Thank you, Bruce. I saw all the suppliers and partners for Aptera and confirmed my investment on Republic. Well, good for you, Thomas. Thank you for supporting them directly. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, Jordan says excited that the ATVM loan application is almost done. Well, they said it's been submitted and they expect a response in 6 weeks. I think he said. My dad keeps dissing on Aptera, but the more of the data and information on it I show him, the more he's appreciating it as an engineer and coming over to the idea of EVs. See, that's what's been so fun for me because I was dismissive too. If you go back and watch my very first video on the Aptera, I was like, this sounds really cool, but I'm a little bit skeptical if this is actually possible. Like those numbers sound too good to be true. But then the more I dove into it, I'm like, okay, well, what do vehicles? Creates a vehicle? What makes a vehicle more efficient? I guess is what I'm trying to say. What makes watt hours per mile increase versus what makes it decrease? And I have essentially, other than Lucid, which doesn't even really count, they're not delivering that many of the lower end vehicles, but basically I have the most efficient vehicle you can buy, the Model 3 rear wheel drive. And if I follow the speed limits and the weather is good and everything, I can get around 220 watt hours per mile. Maybe if I get a wind helping me out a little bit, I can get it close to 200 watt hours per mile. And I go, okay, 200 watt hours per mile, 220 watt hours per mile, somewhere in there, with a 4,000 pound four-wheeled vehicle. This vehicle, the Aptera, is targeting 2,000 pounds, 3 wheels, and far more aerodynamic. Coefficient of drag closer to 0.13, whereas my Model 3 is like 0.22, I think. I forget the coefficient of drag, but basically half the coefficient of drag, half the weight, 0.25% less wheels, less rolling resistance. Does it make sense that you could drop 220 watt hours per mile down to 100 watt hours per mile? I suppose that makes sense. And then you look into how heavy are battery packs. Can you actually fit a 100 watt hour battery pack in a vehicle the size of the Aptera? Look into the width a little bit. Okay, this is actually kind of a wide vehicle. It's bigger than you think. And what's energy density like with present day battery technology? What's the watt hours per kilogram essentially? And you go, yeah, okay, you could. I'm sure the 1,000 mile range Aptera will be the heaviest Aptera. And it will probably not be as efficient, of course, as the Launch Edition or the lower range 250 mile range variant. But if it's, say, 2,200 pounds on the high end or even 2,400 pounds, that's still close to half the weight of my Model 3, despite having 100 kilowatt hours versus 60, which is what my car has. And as you get higher and higher in speed, aerodynamics is working against you harder and harder. So that coefficient of drag matters at higher and higher speeds when you're going 60, 65, 70. That's when that coefficient of drag really starts to pay off. And I'm sure it probably won't get exactly 100 watt hours per mile at highway speed. But I'm still impressed by it, assuming the watt hours per mile is worse. Like, that's why I got excited for Aptera. I was like, let's say they're way off on their range figures. They don't hit 100 watt hours per mile on average. Let's say it's 30% worse. Now it's 130 watt hours per mile. Okay, well then that means the 1,000 mile range turns into a 700 mile range. 700 miles of range on an EV that's under $50,000. Can anyone else come close to that? Oh, and also it charges itself. Like, that's amazing. That's still an incredible feat of engineering to get 700 miles of range on a vehicle with no combustion engine and on a vehicle that can charge itself from the sun. So worst case scenario, it's still incredibly good range. Even if it's 50%, cut in half, 500 mile range when consuming close to the same energy that my Model 3 is consuming. That's amazing. Does Aptera have built-in ambient lighting like Mercedes? I doubt it because that likely wouldn't help with efficiency. I'm pretty sure they just have the main interior display and probably some cabin lights in the top, but they're not going for luxury. Aptera is going for affordability above pretty much everything else. Um, let's see. I'm glad to hear that your dad's coming around on it, Quill, though. I had a very similar experience with my parents as well. They were skeptical and stuff, but they got excited once I interviewed the CEO because that's the first time I ever got to interview like a high up executive at a company. I was really nervous and excited and pumped that I was going to get to talk to him. And once they saw, I was like, whoa, Drew got to interview someone? Let's check them out. Actually, I have family members that live not terribly far away from Aptera's headquarters, so I'm hoping to make a trip down there eventually and check out their place. EVs are optimized for city speeds, and their estimated range always drops by 25% plus on the highway. Aptera is optimized for highway speed. That's partly true, Jordan, but not entirely. The EPA range cycle is testing with 55% highway driving and 45% city driving. So if you drive the speed limit and the weather is decent, which is not always the case because a lot of us like to drive 15, 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, you can get your EPA range estimate. I have, for the record. There's a nearby town we drive to because I live in a pretty rural area, so we don't like the grocery store options where we live are kind of limited, so we drive a little bit further to get to a bigger grocery store that has a wider selection of groceries at a good price and everything. And it's about 50 miles round trip, and we have some friends and family that are out there too, so we see them and visit with them. So it's like 25 miles there, 25 miles back, and I have hit 220 watt hours per mile in my car doing that drive, and it's mostly highway driving. I just tend to go the speed limit because I want to get the better efficiency, and I'll get 220 watt hours per mile, which is essentially what the EPA says my car will get. So it's not a guarantee that all EVs get worse range on the highway. Yes, they use more energy on the highway, but usually the EPA range cycle accommodates for that. If you're driving at faster speeds, or there's a lot of wind, or if it's really cold or really hot outside, then the car will use more energy per mile to condition the battery pack or to fight the aerodynamics. But yeah, the Aptera is definitely more optimized for highway speeds than most vehicles. I consider an Aptera investment as a good karma donation with some chance of a payoff, potentially a good one. No regrets of a total loss. I'm totally there with you, John. I absolutely, I was tempted to maybe if I was single, I would feel more comfortable, but I have some financial responsibilities to accommodate for my family, just some behind the scenes stuff to where I don't really feel that comfortable putting a ton of money towards Aptera. And it was kind of my realization that, okay, I could sell my house, I could sell my car, I could liquidate my retirement funds, I could sell all my stock and put every last dollar I have to my name into Aptera, and it would barely move the needle on the accelerator program. It would be like, it wouldn't do much. So I had to come to terms that I'm not going to make or break the company, but what I can do is spread awareness about them, talk more about them, educate people on them, and fight a lot of the FUD about them. And I think that is probably more beneficial than all the money I could dump into them. And unfortunately, I don't make a ton of money off of YouTube, but again, if I made a ton of money, maybe I wouldn't be as interested in Aptera because I would just buy more expensive Teslas or whatever. I think that's a great mindset to have, John, towards them, to just good karma donation, because I'm still going to be fighting for them even if they don't make it. Even if they don't make it, I'm still going to be advocating for this is what other EV companies should do. You know, this is what I want electric vehicles to look like and be like. I invested with the same motivation. I make charitable donation. Good for you guys. That's awesome. In November of 2021, both my wife and I stopped by and got rides in Luna. Amazing and rare experience. That is awesome. Yeah, I've got a lot of trips planned, unfortunately, over the next few months, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make it. But what do I think is a reasonable price for the launch edition? I know a lot of you guys, because I've seen how a lot of people respond. A lot of you probably disagree with me, but I think the Aptera could cost more. I think it's priced lower than it needs to be, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'm more of a push towards maybe raise the price a little bit because I just want them to succeed. And I've seen companies that start production but are losing so much money that they have to then stop production. And I'm a little bit worried about that. I don't want Aptera to start production and then realize they're burning too much cash and then they have to stop production. So I want them to be smart about it. And it appears, as far as I can tell, they're being very wise with their spending and everything. So I think they're doing the right things, but they have way more demand than they have production capacity for. So, like, they're probably just going to start with, like, one shift, I think, with all of their manufacturing equipment. And then once they start delivering vehicles, they'll probably find some defects or some problems they need to address. And then they'll have to calibrate the equipment a little bit more. So, like, I don't think day one with the Aptera, they're going to instantly start with a run rate of, 20,000 or 40,000 vehicles a year. They're probably going to start with a run rate pretty slow, even though I know they say they want to hit the ground running pretty quickly, because Sandy Monroe and Associates has talked about how some companies start too slowly and then they bankrupt themselves because they don't have a good enough revenue stream. I would guess in their first year of production, they'll probably make 7,000 or 8,000 vehicles. And then maybe in their second year of production, they'll get it up to 14,000, 15,000 vehicles. But they have over 42,000 pre-orders. Okay? Which means even when production starts, they're not even going to be, assuming they don't get any new reservations. Let's say when production starts, for some reason, they wouldn't do this. But hypothetically, if when production started, they shut off the order page. No one can order any more Apteras for some reason. They just shut it off. It would still take 2 to 3 years before they had delivered on all of the vehicles that have been reserved. Probably more than 3 years. And a backlog that long is not ideal. It's not a good situation because you typically, they talked about this on the webinar today, it's hard to lock in pricing. That's why they won't tell us if the price is going up or how much it's going up or anything, is because they're trying to lock in supply chain agreements with their suppliers for motors and inverters and batteries and parts and everything. But the price of materials and the cost of operations for their suppliers is constantly changing. So that's why when you're a year or two out from production, it's not easy to provide a very accurate price estimate. So it's not, in my opinion, in your best interest to have a 2 to 3 year long wait on your vehicles, because then when they're in production and stuff, people are going to expect, oh, that's how much the vehicle costs. Let me reserve one. But then by the time you get to their vehicle 2 or 3 years down the road, the prices could be totally different. So in my opinion, I think 42,000 reservations is probably more than they need to start with, because I am still a believer, similar to how it went for Tesla and other EVs out there that are affordable, unlike Lucid. Once you start deliveries, there's usually a whole nother wave of demand. So right now, they already have a 3-year backlog, basically, of production of reservations. But once you start deliveries and people actually own them and people are driving them around and using them, and there's people like Steve from Aptera Owners Club and probably, of course, Bruce Nelson as well, other people part of the accelerator program, once they are driving them around and using them, they'll probably get another huge wave of orders because now they're going to be in the media. Hey, this new startup company has actually started delivering cars. Then people are going to see them on the streets. Whoa, what the heck is that? What are people driving? That's weird. What is that? It's just free advertising for Aptera, basically, just to deliver the product. And then I think you would probably get another 20,000, 40,000, maybe 60,000 reservations on top of that. So basically, I think the launch edition could cost more than what they're targeting. Right now, they're saying 33,200. I still think even if they raised it to, say, 35,000 or 38,000, sure, it's close to the price of a Model 3 or even a Model Y, but I think this vehicle is targeting, I think that's the misconception a lot of people have. People are like, oh, when Tesla comes out with a cheaper model, no one will buy the Aptera. That's not the point. Aptera's focus is extreme efficiency in solar charging themselves, not having to plug it in, and getting range closer to 400 miles. That's what I see with the reservations trackers that people have set up. There's Most people ordering Apteras are targeting 400 miles or more of range. 400, 600, 1,000 miles. Model 3 isn't getting that. Model Y isn't even getting that. And Model 2 definitely isn't going to get that. Tesla's next generation vehicle that's going to supposedly cost $25,000. Who knows what it'll actually cost. But even that vehicle is probably going to be like 260, 270 mile range. And it's not going to be as efficient. It's not going to charge itself. And it probably won't have CarPlay. Thomas Vu says 38,000. I think that's a good maximum to keep it in the ballpark of it's sub 40,000. But think about it for a second. This is a vehicle that can charge 40 miles of range per day, does 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds, all-wheel drive. Did I say 400 miles of range? Yeah. And 32 cubic feet of storage space, charging itself from sunlight, and getting 100 watt hours per mile. Nothing else on the road matches that. I like, sure, there's a little bit of overlap because, okay, yeah, for that amount of money, you could buy a sedan with less range that doesn't charge itself, with worse efficiency, but with more seats. Sure, but they don't. I don't see one cannibalizing the other. I see the people that care about the extra range and who care about the efficiency and the solar charging buying the Aptera, and the people that care about having 4 or 5 seats buying Tesla. They can coexist. They're not. It's not like one can exist and the other one can't in my head. But considering the backlog of reservations they have, it's more discouraging. I think you guys are more supportive, which is nice. I'm thankful to see that. But the live chat during the webinar, there's a lot of toxic people in most YouTube live chat. Unfortunately, that's pretty common. But I saw a lot of people saying like, "Oh, don't raise the price. If you raise the price anything at all, I won't buy it." And I'm sure if they raised the price to 35,000 or 38,000, they would probably lose a bunch of orders. People be like, nope, too expensive, I'm not buying it. But it's like, at this point, I think they can afford to do that because there's, of those 42,000 reservations, I think there's a very passionate, at least 20,000 of those reservations are probably willing to spend an extra $5,000 on the car because they love it so much and there's nothing else on the market like it. And I love these guys because of their passion for efficiency and their obsession with manufacturing efficiency and scaling and everything. I just think they're so cool, they're so friendly, and they're so transparent about how the company is doing that I want them to have better margins. I want them to be really profitable. Like, I want their future to be secure. So I would say, yeah, price gouge a little bit, take a big profit margin on those first vehicles because you need that profit margin. And over time, as you scale up production, you can afford to bring the prices down. And sure, maybe those early deliveries will feel a little bit cheated, like, hey, I spent more than it's worth now. But I think they'll be so passionate about it, they won't care. They're so passionate about the mission and the product that they'll be totally fine saying, okay, the new one's cheaper, great, I'll buy that one too because it probably has some better tech, and I'll buy a second Aptera and I'll sell my old one to help offset the cost. Yeah, like I'm in favor of them. I tried to convince Chris. Unfortunately, I knew I'd probably get some backlash for that. But when I was interviewing him, I was kind of pushing him a bit. I was like, don't you think you should consider charging a bit more, at least for new reservations? Because I thought my motivation is, I think if they said everybody with an Aptera reservation gets to keep their price point, but all new reservations have to pay an extra $3,000 or $4,000, I think that would increase the delivery take rate because now everybody who put in their order for an Aptera would feel like they already got a good deal. They would be like, oh, hey, I've already got an appreciating asset, so I better not cancel my reservation, even if they don't end up wanting the vehicle for whatever reason. They decide they want more seats or whatever, or they don't like the software, or something goes wrong. They're still more likely to take a delivery of that vehicle because they know that they could resell it for a profit. So right now, because the price is kind of fluctuating and we don't really know what it's going to cost, I think there's a pretty high likelihood that many of the Aptera reservations won't go through. They just put down a reservation for the sake of, yeah, I might as well, but maybe it won't work out or whatever. I keep forgetting I reserved one, by the way. I'm like, oh yeah, I reserved one too. But if they know that they have their price locked in, that's what Rivian did, basically. They tried to raise prices on existing reservation holders, and a bunch of people got upset and threatened to cancel, so they decided, never mind, we'll honor your old pricing, but all new orders have to pay a higher price. That seemed to go over pretty well. That seemed to make the Rivian pre-order holders pretty happy, and they were like, cool, I get the price that I agreed to, and the new people can pay for the inflation increase. So unfortunately, $5,000 price increase and $7,500 in tax credit is $12,500. What about the tax credit? I don't think the $7,500 applies to the tax credit, but no, I know the three-wheeler complicates things for the IRS. I don't like tax credits. They make everything confusing. Dramata says Aptera doesn't have investment is because they aren't realistic enough. You can't start a car company with an affordable car. Lucid is expensive for a reason because it's the right way. That's hilarious. Lucid, the company that is losing money on every car, is doing it the right way. The company that can't sell their cars because no one's buying them. The company that is relying on Electrify America that is breaking their cars. No, I think Aptera, with their efficiency focus, actually has way better margins. If you look into their business pitch. Andromeda, it sounds like you haven't looked at their investor meetings. But by only using a 40 kilowatt hour battery pack and having it be structural, minimizing the number of parts and components needed, they actually have far better profitability on those vehicles than Lucid has, because Lucid has to put in 118 kilowatt hour packs and very complex, very intricate management systems because of how they abuse the battery pack, and their powertrains are very complicated and custom engineered, whereas the axles and everything, and Aptera gets to bypass all that with the Alafe motor. Aptera doesn't have a paint shop to worry about, which is very, very capital intensive for Lucid, because they're bragging about their paint quality and their interior quality. No, there is so many manufacturing expenses that Aptera gets to bypass with their design that Lucid doesn't, because they went forward with, let's make a expensive high-end car. By the way, even Lucid's expensive cars, they lose money on. They're not in a good scenario, which is why I laugh. Sorry. Hit that thumb. Thank you, Crunch to Grace Hopper. Appreciate you tuning in. And Aptera use NACS. That's the right way to go about it. Choose the superior connector for sure. Lucid is basically crumbling right now simply because a lot of it is just falling back on Electrify America. Wondered about increased chances of hydroplaning with just one wheel at the back. Maybe, but I mean, it's still relative to three wheels. 2,000 pounds or so on those three wheels makes it. I don't think it'll be any worse than a traditional gas vehicle. My experience, hydroplaning is mostly if you are speeding. Just slow down a little in heavy rain and you should be fine. Yeah, in general, it's not a good idea to go super fast through puddles. That's very true. I think the reason Aptera doesn't have investment is because everyone's very skeptical of EV startups now, partly because of Nikola and also because Rivian and Lucid are doing so horribly. Have you seen the stock price for Lucid recently? What are they at? Oh, Canoe's down too. Let's just look at Lucid in the past 2 years. So even before they went public, early investors got in at almost $10 a share, and now they're below that, 25% lower than the pre-IPO share price. Rivian's a similar story too. Yeah, from the beginning. IPO'd at 130 and now down almost 90%. So there's a lot of skepticism, and even Tesla, who I think is basically better positioned to survive the recession than anybody. They've got great margins and they're expanding, and Tesla knows how to make money. They're a key at it, and even that, they're from their all-time high, they're down 60% from where they used to be. So that means even if you bought Tesla stock a couple of years ago, you could still be down 20% on your investment. Hopefully you bought back here, and now you're 600%. But just during a recession, less people are risky with their investments. So Aptera inherently is just a very different looking vehicle. It's very radical, and it doesn't fit into a traditional box, which people see innovation as risk. Because it's so different, people are unsure about it. Oh, I don't know about all that. So people are less likely to invest in it. But I would argue As far as crowdfunding goes, Aptera has actually done incredibly well with investment. They've gotten over 14 million from the accelerator program and over 90 million through other investments and 20 million through grants, and probably with that Department of Energy loan, there will be another big grant in the next couple weeks. I sold all my Lucid a while ago. I lost like half of my money, but I think I invested like $200 or so. Well, there, at least you could write it off as a loss. Let's see. The fact that Aptera didn't get any tax credit is why Aptera struggles to get investment. It is a huge artificial disadvantage. Right, but I don't think they need it, to be honest with you. I think just the fact that they're targeting sub $40,000 for the launch edition, and the 250-mile range variant should be even close to 30,000. I think 26,000 is it's a great sounding price, but I don't think they need to hit it. I think that a lot of people would still buy the car if it was 30,000. If they just raised the price 40,000 across the board, I'm sure a lot of people would cancel, but I don't think that many. I think it would probably lose 10 or 12,000 reservations. You need to meet the income requirements to get the $7,500 tax credit. That and the battery requirements, but yeah. EV prices are going down. Aptera is in trouble. Aptera is not worried about... Again, there's nothing on the market that is offering what Aptera is offering. Aptera is just not just another electric vehicle that gets 200. The EV prices that are going down are targeting 250, 300 miles of range. Aptera is targeting 400, 600, 1,000, and none of those other vehicles are charging themselves and not requiring a home charging solution. If you don't have a home charging solution, an EV is far less interesting to you, regardless of if it's a $30,000 Tesla or a $30,000 Chevy. But if it can charge itself just from sunlight, just being parked outside, the widespread adoption for that, I think, is much higher. NACS is a risk because completely at Tesla's whims. I think it's in Tesla's best interest to let NACS, they opened up the standard, and Tesla said in that document that companies that adopt North America charging standard will access the supercharger network. So in my opinion, it's in their best interest to let Aptera charge off of it, because then Tesla gets more funding for making a charger that is open to non-Teslas. So it benefits Tesla, it benefits Aptera. I don't see any reason why NACS is a risk. But yeah, they've acknowledged there will be an adapter anyway. So Lucid does have CarPlay, but it doesn't look very good, in my opinion. I'd be willing to put up with kind of crappy CarPlay integration if the car was really cheap, which in the case of Aptera, it is pretty affordable relative to the Lucid. But the Lucid is $100,000 car, and when it has a crappy CarPlay experience like that, it's like, come on, what are we paying for here? By having sub-assemblies in the flow set up with the Sandy Monroe guidance, margins might be better than you expect. I think Aptera is, of all the EV startups I've seen, going to be closer to profitability than anybody, because the battery pack is the most expensive part of the vehicle, and Aptera gets to use substantially smaller battery packs than everybody else. If Chris ends up being right that the smaller battery pack version, the 200-mile range version, if that can get by with like 20 kilowatt hours, that is so much substantially cheaper than what everybody else has to pay. Most other EV companies, whether it be GM, Tesla, they're all paying for usually 70 kilowatt hour packs or 80 kilowatt hour packs, or Rivian's paying like 130 kilowatt hour packs. That is so much more money than Aptera has to pay for like a 20 or a 40 kilowatt hour pack. And on top of that, they don't have a paint shop. That saves a lot of money by just going with the carbon fiber composites. You think anyone besides Aptera will adopt NACS? I really hope so. It's actually really discouraging to me. Like, there's a lot of things Tesla does that I don't like, and I complain about Tesla a lot. But I feel like I'm basically forced to be a Tesla fanboy, because I have a really hard time getting excited for non-Teslas when they're all using CCS and they're supporting this garbage network that has been proven for years and years. Out of Spec has been covering Electrify America for like 2 years, 3 years now, and it's just gotten from worse. It's gone from bad to worse in regards to reliability, the charging speed. It shows how substantially crippled the ownership experience of a car can be if you rely on that network, which is just crap. And I don't see it turning around. So I am shocked that there aren't more companies trying to switch to NACS and take advantage of the supercharger network, because Tesla is open and in favor of more EV competition. It's not even competition. Elon just said the other day he thinks Ford is doing the right thing. He said that Elon Musk said on his own Twitter platform, F-150 Lightning has tons of demand, and they're doing their EV strategy is the right thing to do. So Tesla's not this like everyone else needs to fail. It's got to be just us or no one. No, like Tesla is willing to help. And I think if people put NACS on their vehicles, Tesla will make it much easier for them to access the supercharger network. And I think it's going to matter more if you prioritize the port location. So Aptera, you can reach the cable to the charge port. And you support that connector and that communication protocol. I think the ideal scenario is that you'll be able to just plug in the Aptera and it knows who to bill by just plugging into the car, just like it works with a Tesla. And you don't even have to download an app. Maybe you have to set it up once, make a Tesla account, and tie your Aptera VIN to it, and then it knows who to bill. But I'm just shocked that there's not more companies wanting to do it. Have I experienced any overcrowding and long wait times while trying to charge at a supercharger? 0 times, Philly fan. I've been to busy superchargers, but I've never been routed to one that was full. On my road trip to San Diego, that was when the superchargers were busy. My road trip to Idaho, there was hardly any cars at all of the chargers. They were all pretty much empty for the most part. And yes, Aptera said they will support Android Auto. That's the plan. But on the way down south, there were several times where I was being routed to a supercharger, and then on the way there, it changed to a different supercharger because it said, oh, that one filled up, go to this one. So it's that kind of vertical integration that is incredibly helpful that you don't get if you get a non-Tesla, because EA sucks. I wish more people would support NACS. At least Rivian is building their own network. I think that's the next best thing. If you're going to have CCS, then at least try not to fall back on EA. And Rivian is building out their own adventure network. And actually, if I plugged a Rivian in, because I love Rivian so much, I can't justify the truck. I don't think I'll ever buy one. But I'm trying to convince my dad to buy one because he loves his Toyota Tacoma, and he really loves the Rivian. He has a neighbor that has one, and he likes talking about them. And I plugged in the route from my house to my dad's house on a better route planner with the Rivian, and 3 out of the 5 charging stops were on the Adventure Network. So most of the charging would be done at a Rivian station, not an Electrify America station. So I'm like, okay, that makes me feel a little bit better about it. And I also just think inherently there will always be advantages to charging from a charger that is from the same company that built the car you're driving, because they know what battery pack you have. They know how to precondition the battery pack. They know if they can overrate the amps or the voltages and everything. So I just think inherently it's a good idea to either take advantage of the supercharger network for one, or 2, build out your own charging network if you're going to build your own EVs. So Rivian's doing it the right way. Lucid's doing it the wrong way. One of the YouTubers says Lucid is expensive, but it's value for money. No, I've watched too many road tripping videos of the Lucid to understand that it is a worse road trip experience than a Tesla. And if you're not road tripping with your vehicle, then why are you buying a 500-mile range EV? When you tried the yoke in the Tesla, did you like it? I did. I actually loved it a lot more than the full steering wheel. I don't mind the full steering wheel as much when there's no driver display. Like my Model 3, of course, has a full steering wheel, but there's nothing behind it. There's nothing it's cutting off. So, okay, you can reach wherever you need to reach, and it's fine. But what I didn't like about when I checked out the Model S in the showroom with the full steering wheel, no matter where I positioned that steering wheel, it was covering up icons on the driver display. Whereas when I switched to the yoke, it was all open. I could see the entire display. I could adjust the yoke. I could bring it back and forth and up and down. It sounds like most people are opting for the steering wheel still, though, which is kind of funny because Tesla charges extra for the yoke now. But I'm still very much, even if the data is against me, I like the yoke. I think it looks really comfortable. And I understand that it's probably more complicated for when you're doing hand-over-hand motions and when you're in a tight parking lot and you got to do this or you're backing up or something. I get that it's probably worse in those circumstances, but I acknowledge that that's not what most driving is. Most driving is straight on a freeway for hours and hours. That is what the vast majority of driving is. And in my opinion, the yoke is better for 90% of driving and probably worse for 10% of driving. So the net improvement, I think, is better. So I'm hopeful that Aptera keeps the yoke. If you think the yoke is too weird, I feel like, okay, Aptera vehicles aren't for people who want normal cars. If you're buying an Aptera, that means you're willing to try a lot of things differently in trying to, like, you're comfortable with weird, basically, because you're basically going to be a self-designated Aptera ambassador once they start deliveries, because you're going to get questions everywhere you drive that thing. People are going to be looking at you left and right. Everyone's going to be asking you, why did you drive that? Why did you pick that car? Why are you doing that? And there's visibility screens behind the yoke. So I want Aptera to keep the yoke so that I can see those screens easier. But who knows? Maybe they'll find a way to do it cheaper or something. I like the way it looks so far, though. If I had all the money in the world to buy an EV, I would buy a long-range Model X, and I would definitely get the yoke. I prefer it. I'd like to see driving display in the new Model 3. I think it's kind of unnecessary. What's ironic after checking out the Model S and X is I find the driver display makes the center display better, but I don't really love the driver display. Because for one, it's not a touchscreen, so you can't move around the car and look at the visualization like you can on the Model 3 and Y. And I don't like looking through the steering wheel at the speedometer or the gear selection or whatever. I like it being all on one display, but having that driver display lets the center display be a lot more flexible. Now you can have your music controls and you can move them, and the map is a lot bigger and it takes up more space. So it's ironic, but like I appreciate the driver display for making the center display better, but the driver display itself I don't find that useful. I guess a nice middle ground would be if they actually did a HUD. So they put the speedometer and your gear selector on the windshield, like some cars have. I think the Mercedes EQS does that, where it's a projection on the glass. That way there's no driver display, but you also have a very immersive, customizable 17-inch center display. Thinking 70% of launch edition Apteras will have referral code queue. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good idea. Isn't Android out of technically FOSS? Is there any FOSS alternative CarPlay? I don't know much about it. I honestly don't know. I'm sorry. Aptera should make threaded inserts to allow bolting on the top piece. No need to make entirely separate yoke/wheel. Threaded inserts to allow bolting. I guess they could. I think it might look a little tacky, but they seem to be in favor of right to repair, so I assume they'll be open to stuff like that. But anyway, I think it's lunchtime for me, so I'm going to get going, guys. But thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for the super chats and the channel members for your support. I love talking Aptera. More videos to come, and hope you all have an excellent rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye. Oh, Thomas, yes, Aptera app looked pretty good. I would like to see a charge limiter, though, and I would also like to see data on how much the solar panels are generating. But yeah, overall, the Aptera app looked really, really cool.